somewhere in the middle, so that, you know, it's not just working off the center phone, so we're trying to pick everything up, so.
All right, so can I ask one logistic thing before we start?
Sure.
What we're hearing, is that coming from the speakers here?
Yes.
Is there a way to,
No.
I don't want anything to, not, by mistake, make its way onto a recording that might not. So hopefully.
I don't believe there's anything that's gonna be of a
Okay.
confidential nature,
Okay,
so.
excellent.
But you think you just turned it down anyway, Tom? Okay, good.
Okay.
All right. So with that, before we get to the consent agenda, anything, just logistical or otherwise, before we get going? All right, all set. And as far as you can tell, Tom, we are broadcasting out. Terrific. All right. So number 2, our consent agenda. There are 5 items. Are there any holds on any of those items?
A couple of comments on A minutes.
All right. Anything besides A?
D.
D, okay. So A and D, so are we all set for B, C, and E then? All right, I will move to,
You're looking at.
No, I'm you couldn't see I was looking at you, it's not on the camera. No, I just, in terms of the CSX letter, just making sure that everyone is all set with it's a draft letter as prepared, by Mr. Shea for the board's consideration. Just want to make sure everybody was all set with that.
I'd like to hold that one, I would just like to.
Sorry.
Sure.
okay, so we are down to B and E. So I will move approval of consent agenda items B and E.
Second?
All in favor? Aye.
Shea, aye.
Unanimously approved. All right, let's start with A. Mr. Stivers?
A couple of small things on the minutes for 7:14. On page 5, I was quoted as saying NECC grant was $9 million. The correct number is $1.9 million. So that, I think, needs to be corrected. And then on same minutes for 7:14, on pages 5 and 6, relative to the golf course, Autobahn was misspelled. I hope we're not doing the auto BAHN standards for the golf course. So, good to correct that one.
All right, anybody else have any items for the minute?
Yeah, there was one other item on page 5 at the top, during the discussion of, Mr. Weishen's appointment. Mr. Shea recused himself, but then miraculously also seconded the motion to table it to the next meeting, and that has been corrected to Mr. Stivers after a review of the tape.
From a voice in the hall.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? All right, with those, without objection, with those corrections to the minutes, I'll move approval of consent agenda 2A.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimous. C, and just quick background,
That's what I was gonna ask for.
okay, that the letters from CSX made their way to the Selectmen's office, and after a conversation between myself and Mr. Purple, we referred and requested that Mr. Shea take a look at the letter we received from CSX and take a shot at drafting up a letter to the abutters. Basically, the nub of the issue is that CSX believes, it seems accurately, that they have some right-of-ways in downtown South Road near the tracks, and they are endeavoring to be in contact with abutters to those right-of-ways to address and resolve any issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Shea, who drafted up a letter to the abutters with respect to that.
Yep, exactly, and it's really, the intent is to encourage the abutters to follow up with CSX, to engage in a discussion with them. And it's kind of, the CSX has reached out to the town in response to the town's request of temporary easements from CSX for Main Street work that is continuing east of where the state project ends. also, and I had included or it had sent a map of the area. One of the attachments was a plan that our consultant has developed for the work in the area to get the sidewalks done up to the railroad tracks. We are encroaching upon the CSX right-of-way. There's also a temporary easement that's required to be able to do the sidewalk work. And CSX did not want to grant the easements that the town needs for the roadway work unless and until everything was squared away with the 4 property owners at the corner, at the intersection there of Main Street and the CSX property. So hopefully there can be an agreement reached out. As part of this, I did ask Mark to have Karen do some deed research. We pulled the deeds for the properties at the location just to make sure there wasn't any language in the deed that allowed access onto it. And from what we've seen, that language does not allow that, any use of the CSX right-of-way. It appears that CSX seems to be somewhat willing to allow some use of a portion of that, and that can only happen through continued discussions between CSX and those property owners. So the letter is intended to encourage the property owners to reach out to CSX so that can happen.
Maybe that was kind of where I was going, Brian. I wanted to kind of see if we had an idea before we sent a letter, if CSX is willing to work with, say, Morrow's, because that's basically the parking lot.
It's a huge impact
It's a
tomorrow.
huge impact.
I mean, because theoretically, CSX could show up tomorrow with Jersey barriers and put them at the end of their right-of-way, and takes away a dozen parking spaces from them.
Right, but the intent from you guys' conversations that you had were that, you know, they have every desire at this point to work with the business owners to try to find some equitable solution.
I don't know if that's the case.
I mean, obviously, I don't want to
I'm not going to speak for them,
but, yeah.
um,
I mean, I would just hate to send a letter and end up in the middle of something, but I agree that we need to move forward, so.
yeah.
Okay,
And this is a temporary construction easement?
So the town would need temporary construction easements from CSX to do the sidewalk work.
Okay.
Yeah.
We would be installing sidewalks over part of their right-of-way. So the sidewalks would remain in a
Okay.
portion of their right-of-way for a certain distance off the tracks. But again, to do the work up to the back of the sidewalk, you theoretically need to encroach upon their land to do it, so it's a temporary easement to allow that short-term encroachment.
I thought the letter was good, Brian. Thank you for doing that.
Would that include a permanent easement for the sidewalk that remains after the construction happens, or potentially, or?
Yes, there would be, the temporary easement for the construction purposes, and then the permanent easement for the sidewalk, fixture.
That's for what the town would need.
That's what the town
Now,
would need,
what
correct.
the individual parcel owners would need, they would need to negotiate that with CSX.
Individually.
My understanding is the town is not trying to insert itself into any discussions between the individual property owners and CSX. We're simply trying to encourage that those discussions happen so that CSX doesn't, as Brian said, delineate their property to the extent that they can, which would be, detrimental to the property owners.
Right. I recall that there was some stormwater work that was going on down there as well. Does this easement actually allow Karen to do what she needs in terms of stormwater systems?
I'm not aware that the stormwater system, any drainage work is going to be taking place within the easements. I think that's all within the right-of-way.
Other parts,
we have.
okay. Might be worth just confirming to make sure if we do it once, we don't have to go back,
Mhm.
do it again. Good letter, though, so. see.
Yeah, again, just to come full circle, the idea is there are 3 property interests at that location. There's the towns, there's CSX's, and there's private property owners. And this is simply the town acknowledging that to the private property owners and saying, let's make sure everybody is at the table to resolve this amicably. And hopefully, CSX's correspondence didn't indicate anything contrary to a sense of cooperation. Hopefully that is in fact the case. This letter, I think, encourages the landowners down there to come to the table because CSX appears to have some property rights down there that need to be addressed. So, nice job, Ryan.
Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you.
So with that, I will move to approve consent item 2C, the letter to abutters relating to CSX.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. And finally, item 2D,
Aye.
appoint alternate building inspector, Ms. Malinowski.
Yeah, so I reviewed the gentleman's resume, and I just had some follow-up questions, for the building inspector. One of my concerns was that this gentleman wears multiple hats, and I just don't know where we would be in the order of priority if we needed to rely on a backup building inspector. So I just wanted to understand the needs of the department and see if, maybe we do onboard him, but, give a 90-day window for her to come up with a permanent solution with somebody that maybe is a little bit more available.
I have some of the same concerns, just based on his current positions and his location.
Do we have another alternate building inspector?
We do.
We use as well, so this
We
is
do.
the second alternate. So
We have a second, this would be a second, I mean, this is something we use very rarely, but I think it gives us a level of redundancy.
That was going to be my question, that almost by definition, that an alternate building inspector is going to have
Right.
all sorts of other stuff going on
Mhm.
in other towns.
Sure.
We can table it all together. Do you have a sense, Mark, that if we put this over to our next meeting, the 18th, that would present any sort of a hardship just to have the building inspector weigh in?
I don't think it presents a hardship. I guess would encourage those selectmen that have questions, if we're going to table this, to make sure they get them answered for the next meeting so that we can get that taken care of. I mean, it's a level of redundancy that, we've really not used an alternate building inspector very often. Usually it's vacation coverage. They normally are not weighing in on zoning matters. They're simply conducting inspections so that existing permits that are out there continue to move along to completion. We did have the issue when the building commissioner had a slip and fall, was out for a period of time, and we brought in an outside company simply because the alternate building inspector wasn't available, the one that we had, Mr. Tartikoff, and we were building this building. So not only did we have the continuity of the regular permits, we also we needed to have somebody watching over this building and the construction.
So I think my hesitation is more on if we have some sort of hurricane rip through Massachusetts and the building inspector is on vacation that week and we have this alternate who needs to service the town that he's primarily at, then what's our backup plan? I mean, I think it makes sense to have two alternates, but I don't know if this answers all my questions around what gaps we would.
Well, I mean, you've got one, the one alternate that we currently have is, correct me if I'm not retired, I believe, but maintains his license, so his availability is pretty good.
Okay.
And this gentleman works in a department with multiple inspectors, works in a town where they have
setting discussion. And Mr. Stivers, you did not follow my instructions. And come up with a list of 10.
Just the highlighted ones.
All right, fair enough. I was gonna say, I'm gonna keep a list of 10, and then when you get to it, then we're moving on to the next selectmen's list.
Hey, whose is that?
That's mine.
You're gonna learn shorthand over there. It'll work.
I will also make John attempt to speak more slowly. I do.
All right, so let's jump in, and Mr. Stivers, the floor is yours. I can pull it back, when the Democrats do in Congress, what's the term? I reclaim my time. So be wary of that, I may reclaim my time.
Okay, my concern here is, I think the useful context when you think about the long-term goals, short-term goals. I think the town has changed dramatically over the last 20, 30 years here in terms of population demographics, and particularly expectations of public services in that area. And I think that's likely to continue, so for me at least, it's useful to think about where we're going, as well as where we are now. And I think that it's useful to think at some levels, longer-term things that we are not going to be able to do with this group of near term. So it's important to start the process moving towards socializing ideas and laying the groundwork for things that may take 10 years of time. And simultaneously, I think it's useful to think about things that we can do during this fiscal year, things to improve processes and efficiency services, et cetera. And so I think about those two tracks, and I divided it up into three pieces here. One, the high-level, longer-term strategy that I think leadership of this group can help make happen or start to happen. The two items there, one is, both of them are really infrastructure related. But we talked previously about the value of the work of the capital planning committee, which has done a great job. And I think I can tell you that it's very supportive of that process. I expect it to be very helpful. That is some clarity to the longer term, things that we ought to be better than the short term. So, we play that one. But I also have.
Well, let me just jump in, Mr. Stivers. So let's address them one at a time, so we can just cross them off the list, that we dealt with that and had an opportunity to talk about it. Fair enough?
Good.
Okay.
As long as it doesn't take my time.
I didn't say I was disclaiming yet. Mr. Malinowski reached out to me, and in fact, if you jump ahead to August 18th, one of the items on our draft agenda for that day is for Mr. Malinowski to come in for a variety of different things. And I've had conversations with him in the last 2 or 3 weeks, which led to that being on the agenda, about doing exactly what you're describing. And I'm just wondering is what he and I discussed was capital planning coming in, I don't think it would be monthly, but at least quarterly, with an update about what they're considering, why they are considering, what, if anything, they need from the board of selectmen. And I'm just wondering if you're contemplating something more than that, or if that's sufficient.
No, I think that's fine. Stay in touch, and we obviously have the opportunity to listen and talk about take it home. If there's something that is having an agenda. Again, very capable group. I think we're doing good work and confident.
Just as a preview, again, I had very brief conversations with them to get on the August 18th agenda with an eye towards exactly that, which is to see what they're thinking, what sort of long-term, short-term, medium-term projects they've been looking at and are considering, and what, if anything, they need from the board of selectmen, including us saying that's a crazy idea, no, or what do you need from us to support it because it sounds like a great idea. So
I think capital planning, two big goals is to try to do doing a lot of work now because they want to get the capital portion of the budget for fiscal '22, for fiscal '23. They want to get those set at the beginning of the process, not figuring out what we can afford without cutting operations at the end of the process. So they'd like to get that number put in early, and that's why I think they're doing stuff with now.
Yeah.
Under this category, I know through the master plan, and with the survey done, and then the school came up with other things. Have you shared that information with us now? So,
I'm not specifically with
yeah, that would be great, then I think that would have a better idea too, of another range of people that were surveyed that may get some additional.
requests and desires.
Thank you.
So that's probably anything else, Mr. Shea, or Ms. Malinowski? Okay.
One down.
One down.
Hopefully we do that. Other infrastructure pieces that I don't believe, at least I've not heard on the plan, capital plan committee, I think that this longer range radar. One of the issues that Lucy mentioned, the master plan committee has been doing a fair amount of work over the last year with us. And the point that we actually frequently run into, how can we afford to pay for all the things that people seem to are doing? That's something that we hear. And the answer at a high level that seems to be emerging is we got to find a way to generate more commercial taxes. And we have one corridor that actually has a great opportunity for that. That line, we got 4 miles between the Westboro line and the Permian line. The thing that seems to come back frequently in terms of limitation on our ability to generate sewer service for that area. And in fact, with sewer service, or at least what I've been told by real estate people, that will allow people to build higher homes, more square footage, to find a way to do that. That can ultimately affect. And so, an interesting issue, because I know we've explored sewer service in the past, it's been very expensive, but one of the things that strikes me is that as folks, I think, are NWRA, and we recently voted to allow Planet West to connect part of its area to the native sewer system. Native is an NWRA sewer system. And it was a moderately complicated deal. In fact, that can be done. The other thing that's interesting is that we're talking about wastewater and not stormwater here. So the old systems were built to handle both wastewater and stormwater. And you can actually, I'm surprised, I just becoming this on. You can actually move a fair amount of waste to your help with this pipe. So if we had a wastewater pipe running down 9 connected to the NWRA sewer system training center, that could be an interesting thing. Clearly, that's the high-level concept, a lot of different things we're not doing in the practice. But I think at least I'm struck with the possibility of exploring that as a way to ultimately help fund tax rate for things to go along. There are other ways to do that. Technically, wastewater plants are not much more efficient than the engineer, but they're now building buildings that individual wastewater plants and basins that seem to be very cost effective. The ways to deal with it, connection to anybody interested in that. Second topic under the infrastructure piece committee is if you look at the map of the town's water system, the thing that jumps out most people is the Pine Hill Road that they don't have to stop. I view that as more of a public safety issue than a resident convenience. Those folks do have wells, other water systems, probably not likely to include in additional water. However, the cost of running a pipe down Pine Hill Road with very much water firefighting, I think is lower. In fact, I think Framingham, last time we tried anecdotally, they claimed that we don't have the water to get support. But we got 1 or 2 fires a year out here at most. I think we've used very, very little water. And we can connect either Framingham, which is NWRA water community, or Marlboro actually to the water system harbor topic north of the town. I think that it could be an extra public safety upgrade to find a way to run water line to fire.
So 2 things, just to, which I having done a couple of these projects, obviously, and trying, for speakers instead of again, is taking a look at the cost recovery methods that you're gonna use, whether or not these are gonna be betterment projects.
Right.
So that the properties that are improved by adding water, by adding sewer, are actually going to be paying, for these. And, in communities I've worked in, done extensions, where communities have all said, yes, we want this, we will pay, for the betterments and the improvements, to our property. So that's, something to consider too, if people, do they want it?
Yeah.
And are they willing to, pay for it?
In theory, to reduce property insurance.
Absolutely, there's a lot of benefits for it, right?
And NWRA and others actually have grants for water infrastructure. So again, the way it's funded. But again, the first issue is, can engineers look at it and say it's feasible, what's it going to cost, what's it going to be. The other thing that's always been interesting to me is the idea of an electric light company. There are about 40 some odd towns in Massachusetts who run their own electric system. The biggest one I don't know where the world is, certainly we have lower electric rates and better service in terms of coverage, storms, and so forth, than national grid around in town. So I think there's good evidence that it can work. I'm sure there's also good evidence that it can be a disaster. So I don't know what the right kind of criteria are. If there's enough history around, I think somebody could look at that and say, here are the things that make it very attractive to these kinds of towns. Here are the things that the town might not have, that towns under 10,000 lives, that's the 20,000. I don't know, but I think that's an interesting way to look at it. So those are my three strategy kind of issues.
Well, let me just interject there, because those are, it strikes me that all three of those items, are capital planning items. Well, I mean, the only way they're not capital planning items is if they don't happen.
Yeah, which I don't think they do at this point, and I would suggest.
So it just strikes me that, was part of our discussion, if not on August 18th, which is just, there's some very targeted things in the short to medium term that capital planning will talk about. But that, it strikes me that that's a good conversation to have with, capital planning, A, to see if it's something they are interested in focusing on, because otherwise, for all three of those, it strikes me the sort of thing you could just end up talking about. And you really would need sort of a focus, whether it's capital planning as a committee, or some independent committee that's looking at those infrastructure, sort of longer term infrastructure. So, if not on the 18th, and again, I think for capital planning, get together with us on the 18th, we've got a decent number of things to talk about. But maybe for the next, sit down, we'll definitely discuss those.
I agree, and I'm very interested in being, on the other hand, I'm most interested in us finding ways to pick the small numbers, whatever. Versus having 14 contracts, 3 cents, 8 cents, yeah, a lot of that, traction.
And Roger, Jay, okay, the last thing I'll say on him is the obvious, entity and, in particular, individuals who include in any sort of discussions when we do have, is Mr. Wood. I mean, John Wood, EDC, he's had a couple conversations with me, and he is, putting the downtown initiative aside for a second, he is very focused on what needs to be done for business development on Route 9. So he's another, they are another important part of the conversation.
Yeah, and my first stop would be to that.
Okay.
Can I suggest reaching out to Mr. Marino, to his team, if there's the opportunity to, come to a capital planning committee and just tell them what you're looking for and kind of let them, fire questions at you, because I think that's the right group to have some questions.
I'd be happy to do that.
Even for a future meeting, we're already going to send them the capital, your long-term facility, and maybe an estimate of the pay. Talk about it, it might be great to, again, it's start the conversation sooner rather than later.
I think particularly with a root down sewer initiative, that's something that we need to build. Because the routes that need sewer service, those are high water. An office park, an office building is not, as high a water user as restaurants. So the area where Tomaso's and Cola is more in need of that type of service than general office. But so then if you're going to target high water users, planning's going to need to get involved in that. If there are zoning changes that need to make, EDC get involved in that. I think that's going to be a long-term planning thing, but we're going to need to build a lot of consensus, and it's going to be costly, and we need to have good stories about it. And that's not being cost. We have to build a case for why it's worth it. Correct.
We're in a very fortunate position in that we have lots of water, being an MWRA community. There are towns who are desperate for water, and their wells are going dry and everything, so I'd much rather be in our position than some of our neighbors' position with that. So that tells me there's a potential solution here, but you're exactly right, Brian. It's a lot of moving parts, a lot of interests here that need to be communicated with and aligned, so, okay? Good, thanks. So those are the longer-term strategy issues. The shorter-term opportunities I divided up into two pieces, one that require external help for, the other that we can do ourselves, basically. On the external side, I think I've raised this one before. We need to get to the 40B safe harbor threshold where developers can't come in and file a 40B application and build a development under the 40B more relaxed zoning requirements. We need to have about 360 subsidized housing units. We've got 294 today in the latest data I've had, so we need 66 more. And my guess, to get us through the 2030 census, if we can find another 100, that would make us very comfortable for the next 15, 20 years kind of thing, unless something dramatic happens. And so there are organizations out there, some nonprofits, who actually will work with you to build a 40B development. And the trick is to find property that works. If we could, and off the top of my head, if you could build a smaller version of Madison Place on Route 9 someplace, you've got a lot of things going for that kind of location. We don't own a lot of property there. There are other people who do. Can you find a way to motivate a builder to get involved with that, or trade property or whatever? I don't know. But that would be a great thing to be able to take some of the pressure off in terms of controlling our own destiny as far as development of those kinds of housing units. So again, needs some work, but I think that's something if we could explore. There are some opportunities out there that we could maybe make some progress with that. And all we need is a third party to help do it, and we control a lot of the rest of it ourselves.
All right, let me stop you there. Does anybody have any, because I've got some really, I don't know if they're extensive thoughts, but I think they're important thoughts about this issue, and it's one of my items, which relates to diversifying our housing stock. And so, if anyone else wants to weigh in first, and then, okay. I think, Sam, it's a much bigger issue than that.
Oh, yeah.
Ms. Malinowski brought it up last time, and I said, well, let's talk about it, in terms of my list, in terms of whatever term you are most comfortable with. If you look, I went on the U.S. Census website and took a look at South Row's 10,000 residents or thereabouts numbers, and South Row's population of 10,000, 83% is white alone, 1.6% is Black African American, 13% is Asian, and then I think 3% Hispanic. And to the extent a town of South Row has the opportunity to address systemic issues, you have to look at systems. And one of the things that not just Southborough, but a lot of towns have not been particularly good at is looking at their zoning, planning, more broadly than what are our 40B numbers. Because those are not unimportant, but they are very, in my view anyway, a very small part of the picture. So I think I applaud you for identifying that. I just think it's a much bigger discussion about what is our view, again, from a systemic standpoint, about steps we could, can, should take to diversify our housing stock, because to the extent it's a laudable goal to try to diversify our population more than it is, both from an economic standpoint and from a cultural and ethnic standpoint, I think that's a much broader discussion than what are our 40B numbers.
I agree with you 100%. And again, we've talked about redoing the zoning code, which I think is important. And I think these can operate on parallel tracks. I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. And the more we can actually get over the 40B safe harbor threshold, the more we can control what we do with the rest of these devices that we can control, like zoning requirements. And what we do with SHOPSI in terms of housing, we've got some money there that we ought to be thinking about. I think about that in concert with the Southville, Corderville area and the T station. I think there's a huge opportunity there for housing tied to transportation. The state is eager to spend money on that kind of stuff if we could come up with a plan that would motivate that for people who could get access to the rail system and housing they can afford. So there are towns who don't have any of those kind of infrastructure opportunities, and I think we're well positioned, but we haven't done too much with it. And there are multiple parts of that.
And I guess we can talk about, I just think that we could get lost in the weeds of 40B.
Yeah.
And make that our goal as opposed to just a broader goal and thinking about it. And that, I mean, an awful lot of what we talked about at our previous planning meeting and are already talking about tonight is that, on the one hand, we're the Board of Selectmen, and we have, powers and responsibilities, incumbent upon that position. But whether they're, boards and committees that we appoint or that are elected, to get stuff done on the zoning side, on the planning side, it's got to be a collaborative effort. And on the one hand, I mean, the master plan committee, that's a useful tool in all of that, but they're not the elected officials.
Sure.
Again, I just think from a planning, zoning standpoint, that what we should be thinking about isn't narrowly confined to 40B, but, really getting the planning board in here and talk about what needs to be done from a zoning standpoint and what initiatives they have in mind. And the EDC, I mean, on the one hand, economic is the front end of that, but they've got some interesting thoughts about how to, steps that we can take from an economic standpoint and otherwise that lend themselves to diversifying our housing stock. And going to something, Brian, you said about the anything relating to Route 9, these would have to be building blocks because, we're talking about changes in some pretty dramatic ways, potentially, in terms of the way we view zoning, the way we view our housing stock and things like that. And I think it's a pretty important conversation to have.
I think too, Marty, along the same lines of diversity and affordability. Affordability is a tough issue for a young family wanting to come to Southborough. I mean, if you look at the median price of a home here in Southborough, I think it's $596,000. That's not attainable to a lot of people. I don't know if that answers through zoning, even a 40B, for instance. So there's a house that goes on the market. You have to meet 80% of the median income of your town. In a town like Southborough, somebody still has to make a lot of money. It's not affordable to, like, our seniors, for instance, even. We have seniors leaving town because they can't afford to live here anymore, and there is no affordable option for them. Even our over 55s that tend to go in, tend to be on the $550,000 to $600,000 mark. So even though we're saying affordability, we're not really addressing the animal in the room, that it's not affordable. And so I think that leads to part of the conversation as well. If we really want diversity and we truly want affordability, then things are really going to have to to change. And I don't know if 40B is the answer because the threshold is so high for a 40B. Maybe it is through zoning. Maybe we truly do have affordable units. But through DHCD, I don't know how we attain that based on the median price of the homes in this town. So I think it's a much bigger picture. I think it's a great conversation, and I'm wholeheartedly ready to jump into this conversation. And when Shopsy did their forum for their housing plan, there was a lot of comments and a lot of feedback on just this, that, housing in Southborough is unattainable for a lot of families. Unless you make a very good income, it's tough. It's tough. You don't see a lot of I won't say lower price, because in a lot of towns, even our lower to mid-price homes in Southborough are still a lot, but, even a modest ranch in Southborough, you typically don't find a house under $300,000 in Southborough, and that's even on the smaller end. So, and maybe through the zoning, maybe it is something more of a duplex or a multifamily or something along those lines that we could do, that we could partner with somebody. I think if you want true diversity, that's one of the things that's going to have to change.
And Shopsy is another, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have left them out. But the other thing is, we've been very good we've got a reasonably robust Community Preservation Act. And we're a pretty wealthy community, and we fund that pretty substantially every year. And we've been very good about identifying open space to spend that money on. We've been very good about recreation. We've been very good about historical. We haven't been nearly as good on one of the other pillars of Community Preservation Act spending, which is affordable housing.
Yep.
And, that's another step back to say, have we been remiss in not including that as important a pillar as recreation and open space and historical for expenditures, and make that a priority? Again, we need to walk the walk. And not just talk the talk about changing this demographic of Southborough, which I think everybody agrees is an important goal to have. It's not going to happen overnight, but if we have more, some pockets of more affordable housing, and we're spending wisely, whether it's from CPA or otherwise, then I think we're at least taking some baby steps in the right direction, and maybe some bigger steps.
And I think there's a really invigorated group on Shopsy right now. They're very active. They're meeting.
Is that Ms. Jasinski, who's the chair now?
It is.
Energetic is a good word for her. No offense to Victoria.
But it's really a great group that's together, and John Wood is on it as well. Okay. So some of the people we talked about tonight already have a seat at the table there. Jesse Stein from Planning is on it as well. Okay. So
good stuff.
I think you'll see good things come out of there. And again, this might be a great conversation to have Shopsy come in sometime this fall and ask what the plans might be and what we could do to help make those plans come to fruition.
Okay, good.
I do agree 100% that it's a much larger issue. I picked the 40B thing as a shorter term thing that we can do to give us more flexibility to deal with some of those other issues, but there are a lot of moving parts to that we ought to be looking at.
And I apologize for using it as a springboard, but it seemed a good opportunity to have a broader discussion.
Yep.
All right, good.
Back on track. The other one's a quick one. There's parcel 5440 behind the House of Pizza here. We're talking with those folks. I think that opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of downtown development, and I remain optimistic that we can get that done. There's apparently some potential funding pending for that in the House bill that was passed recently. The Senate is still debating it. If that actually goes through, that I think gives us more flexibility. I hope we are aggressive negotiators on that one, because the lot is unbuildable. So maybe we can use that.
Mr. Stiver's white whale.
Yeah.
He is going to take that parcel.
That's correct.
So let me shorten your harpoon a little bit. I did hear back from David Melly in Carolyn's office, because my understanding when I originally asked the question, is this like capital bond bill money where, millions and millions and millions of dollars in projects get voted and approved, but the money then never gets released, so the projects never actually come to fruition? And I was given the impression that, no, this is a federal, or CARES Act type money, that the money is there, this gets passed, this moves forward.
Wow.
Yep.
The clarification was given to me today that, no, actually, in fact, this is just like bond bill, capital bond bill.
Oh.
Okay, so all of these things may get included, it's then a matter of lobbying for them to get released.
Funded.
So,
Well,
So once Ashland Public Safety gets built, we can plan on the, money for the.
you do realize this works, right?
Yeah.
Rachel?
Yeah.
So do we know, I know we've been talking about this parcel for a while, do we know as far as, before we get further in the process, has any testing been done on the site? I mean, again, I know there's a high water table.
Yeah.
At some point, I guess someone's gonna have to do a feasibility study of that site to see.
So let me, I guess, yeah, so let me, yeah, and I think I've had some conversation with you offline, but let me articulate for the board, because my last conversation was with the chair. So when I think this last left the board discussion, the board had said we should at least put in a letter of interest so that they understand that we're interested in the parcel. And I had several back and forths with Grid as to what they wanted, and then COVID hit, and everything fell off the table. Revisited those conversations in June, restarted those, and they said, yes, a letter of interest, that would be great. They sent me what they were looking for the letter of interest, which was essentially, and Mr. Chairman can correct me if I'm wrong, basically a purchase and sale document that they wanted us to sign.
Wow.
And I said, I do an awful lot on behalf of the board when you vote and you ask me to do these things and I carry these things out. I am not comfortable signing this, or doing
I
it.
jointly
Yeah,
decided we
yeah, you know, and
the
so.
authority to do that.
Yeah, and,
wait a minute, why not? Hold on.
yeah, and I know that, you know, and I know, Mr. Stivers, you've brought up the fact, well, look, you know, this may be, you know, a good tax write-off, this may be, you know, have some benefit to them to, you know, not maybe granting the parcel to the town for $1 or something, but, you know, their position has continually been in all my conversations is that this parcel was purchased with ratepayer money, therefore we need to get the assessed value, which is the 252.7, 252.9.
Yep.
And I understand that's a starting point, and maybe once you decide to enter formally into a purchase and sale, as we did with St. Mark's, there was obviously some negotiation that went on at that point, but we've got to agree, I think, to get to that point, because it's a larger discussion, as you said, with the wastewater piece. We're not just purchasing a parcel for, say, $250,000. There's another $750,000 or $1 million on top of that for a package plant. If it's wastewater we're talking about, then you've got to talk about connecting it. So infrastructure, so it's a piece to a larger puzzle.
Right, right. But, well, it's interesting, though, that apparently, so are we at the place where if we were willing to do it, there's a purchase and sale there that we could sign? I think that's an interesting step. So not that I'm saying we should, but that's farther than I thought we had gotten. So anyway, I'm not suggesting
I
that
just
we do
assumed
that.
a letter of interest was a letter of interest. It was
Yeah.
not a purchase and
Yeah,
sale.
yeah, okay.
But this is what they
Well,
wanted us to execute.
Again, my point is simply, I think that needs to continue to be on the radar here, and we ought to, I think, continue to discuss it, and it's good that they're still talking, so thanks. Okay?
Anybody else have anything on that? No, again, I think it's a terrific idea, and agree that at some point, that's an interesting location.
It
In
is.
terms of you know, again, the gas station is not that far away, but it'll be interesting to see exactly what that land looks like. And I understand I may disagree with it, but I understand the position that's being taken, that it was paid for with ratepayer money.
Yeah.
Ideally, if the state is willing to match that ratepayer, you know, all the better for us. So kudos to Captain Ahab here, Mr. Stivers, for getting that amount at least included in the at the front end as monies that we might be able to use from the state to purchase that parcel.
Mr. Chairman, one more thing before Ms. Braccio calls me out and says, you didn't answer my question. Well, no, I know, but in terms of the environmental piece, there was a conversation prior to the letter of interest that they were going to go and conduct, you know, basically a phase 1 tabletop study, you know, for the environmental piece and that. My understanding, I've got no indication that was ever done.
Okay.
So I assume that, again, that would likely be part and parcel of a purchase and sale.
So that would need to be done, and EDC is moving forward with a study to look at the feasibility.
That was part of the second
The
part of that
wastewater.
EEA
Right.
grant.
But I would want to see the results of that report
Yeah.
before I agree to
But in sort of,
purchase and sale.
in sort of a perverse way, I think if there is some sort of hazmat issue on that site, I think that actually potentially helps us. Because I think that, at least I understand that towns purchase that kind of property, pave it, use it for playground, rubberized playground, parking, pop-up spaces for food trucks or whatever. And that basically.
It just changes the whole discussion
that's
from
right.
what, from what we were potentially looking at.
But you could put a wastewater plant on there as well, actually.
It's
So-
it's an interesting discussion. It's
Yeah.
an odd location.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's a very odd location.
yeah.
yep.
So,
Anyway, so.
all right, number 5, Mr. Cyrus. Not that I'm counting.
I'm out of fingers. The other category I had was operational things that are internal that we could do ourselves. And I'm going to skim over a couple of these, but the one thing I've been interested in is the relationship between the personnel board and town administrator, assistant town administrator. I've been to attending personnel board meetings for several years now, and questions continue to come up about whose responsibility it is to do X, Y, and Z here. And I think there's some inconsistencies between the town administrator bylaw and the SAP. And I think this is, in my view, this is not, a huge issue that couldn't be solved by sitting down with the personnel board, sorting out who ought to be doing what, and if we get agreement on that, then if there's an inconsistency in one of the bylaws, we can fix it. But I think it's important because human resources, in my mind, are a key element of success for town services. And I think we need to be very careful about doing all the right things, communicating clearly with the troops in terms of things like job qualification, performance reviews, and so on and so forth. And I think there have been some gaps in that process historically that I think is worth paying attention to here. So not only the process pieces, but performance evaluation we've talked about. I think we ought to be more involved in the selectmen area performance reviews, and I made the observation that I think it's worth also including customer input to that, so people who actually use these services. I know Ms. Braccio has raised concern about the possibility for personality biases in that kind of thing, which is always the case. I mean, I get that one in my own day job, but you've got to sort of take those inputs and weight them appropriately and say, okay, let's put all the pieces together and make it work. So I think focus on that is very helpful, and I think I recall, Mr. Healy, that we have a scheduled meeting with the Personnel Board to talk about some of these things with the chair of the Personnel Board.
I'm not sure if it's scheduled yet, but
We've talked about it,
Yeah.
so I think we can deal with that. And then next item quickly is the grant writer.
Can I stop you there and let's see
okay.
if there's any discussion about the personnel board? I just think that, I mean, obviously, the correct first step is to talk to the chair of personnel. I will tell you, I'm open to the discussion, but I'm a little wary of the Board of Selectmen being involved in personnel evaluations. Getting the results of those and making sure that a process is in place, I think is important, but, I mean, we don't, Mr. Purple and the department heads are the ones who see the day-to-day. I just think I'm a little wary of us being too much of a helicopter above that. Again, getting the results of that, making sure there's a process that we believe in is one thing, but having maybe I'm mischaracterizing what you're saying, but I just think our having a substantive role in that I'm wary of it. That's my view.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess personally speaking, I interact with a lot of those folks on a variety of levels over time. And, I think I've got some reasonably objective opinions about, how that ought to work. So I'm interested in having a voice in that process, so. But
Mr. Shea, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just to, again, go back maybe 8-9 years ago, we had a group that worked really, really hard to advance a town manager proposal for the town. And part of that included expanding the number of selectmen from 3 to 5. And while that didn't pass, it came close, it didn't. That then gave birth to the next year, the Stronger Town Administrator Committee that Mr. Hamilton chaired. I was on it, Mr. Rooney was on it, I think Janet was on it as well. and that did pass. So I think there were a lot of things, and we did expand the board to 5, with the goal of just, trying to delegate those authorities as much as possible that could be given to the town administrator, and let the board focus on bigger scale, higher, bigger goal things. And, I share the concern that you have, Marty, and I don't think that's to say that, that it shouldn't be feedback that board members have with Mark and others on town employees. I do that all the time. And more often than not, the vast majority of the time, it's recognizing excellent performance in the staff that we have.
And Sam, we may be saying the same thing, only in a slightly different way. I don't have a problem. I mean, I did this recently with the EDC, and I went out of my way to send a congratulatory email for the work that was done to get the funding available for the small businesses in town. And so, for us to point out to Mr. Purple and department heads and the like, or to, boards and committees, that someone has done a terrific job, or unfortunately, if they've dropped the ball somehow, I think that's important. I think that's really important.
Yep.
I just think that ultimately, in the end, it's really important that we are comfortable with the personnel evaluation process that's in effect. I just don't think we should be the ones doing it.
Yeah.
So that's my view.
Yeah, I agree that we aren't the primary actors in that, certainly. I guess what I'm thinking about is having input to that process in maybe a more formal way than has been historic, but not the primary drivers of it. I'm concerned about micromanagement, I think, as Ryan is there, so.
Joshua, without my glasses on, I think I saw you.
You did. So, I also agree that we should have some level of involvement. Again, not micromanaging. I have no desire to do that. We all have enough on our plates dealing with what we do. But I think there are things that employees do for us individually that Mark may not know about. So when it comes time for review, I think it's simple as possibly, saying to the board, I'm doing a review on so-and-so, do you have any feedback? And he's still doing the review himself, but it allows us the opportunity, because there was an employee that recently had the review, and I wanted to be able to participate in the respect that they had done so much for me prior to COVID, that I'm at the townhouse all the time, always asking for stuff, always happy to help me in any way. But Mark doesn't necessarily see that. So in that respect, I agree, Sam, that we should have some level of opportunity to share good things that an employee may or may not have done, if you choose to do that. And I'm sure not all the board members, you may not interact with somebody, so you may have nothing to say one way or the other. But I think the opportunity to be able to share good things that he can incorporate into his review, I'm okay with.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or share concerns.
What's the best way for us to make sure you get that information?
So I don't have an issue, and Mrs. Hill can jump in because, she was in the room when it happened type of thing, but there used to be on the evaluation form, a section for board and committee comments, if in fact, there was a board, that was overseeing some of these things. I have no problem with, and I'm going to pick on him because he's sitting in the room. Hi, Tom. So, I'm doing Tom's evaluation. If the board has any comments or anything in that they want to make sure is included, please get them to me by this date. And I can, include those things and everything in that, because I will say, it is difficult, to try to, not so much, believe me, I know more than you think I do on some, those things. When you go and visit departments or go and do things and everything in that, I find out about that. It's remembering it, when it comes time to do the
I have to make sure I'm nice.
to do the I hear the other stuff too, so.
And I guess I'm approaching this from, the processes that we have in our work.
Yeah.
So if you're reaching out to people, I think you ought to include Mark and let Mark know that is going on from the start. I mean, we had an old admin who was, we'd give her stuff to do, ask her to do things, we had a deadline, and, one of the directors of the company would come and say, I need this letter typed, and we'd go up and, oh, sorry, didn't get to your specs. And did meetings later on, and the older guy is saying, oh, I never have a problem, or she always does everything on time. Yeah, it's because you're you. So I could see employees, wanting to, let's say Mark gave somebody an assignment to do, and he had his own little deadline for wanting to get it done, and a board member came and said, hey, can you do this, this, this? Well, that person may prioritize the board thing more so than what Mark had, and that could lead to a situation where, Mark is saying, hey, where is this? I need it. And it's like, oh, well, I haven't gotten to it. So.
See, you're touching on a larger issue, which, hasn't really occurred, for the last 8 years or so. They used to, my understanding, and again, you can correct me, but there used to be a culture that the town administrator knew the least about what was going on, because board members and other people would go directly to departments,
Yep.
They would deal with them, and then things wouldn't get done, and the administrator had no idea what was happening until something went wrong.
Yep.
And since I've been here, the board has been very good, and we've had an understanding that, I have no problem if you're reaching out to department heads. I have no problem, if that's happening. But I want to know about it so that I can be in on the loop of those discussions when, and I'm aware of what's going on. So things don't happen and I'm not aware of it. But then by virtue of my position, I'm somewhat accountable for the fact that they've either happened or not happened. So.
I do think, though, for the employees that we have contracts with that we're negotiating, I do think it's important that we that we are looking at those reviews and do have input into them, because we're the ones that are then sitting at the table to say, this is what we've seen for the last X number of years. This is what we're looking for. I think that that's really important, that we have that we're intimately involved in that process.
And Chelsea, that was part of the context for my comment, because I've asked for 2 of those in the last 6 months here, and they weren't available. So I think that we need to be more focused on the process for that in terms of consistency there. Mm-hmm. And to Lisa's point, I think that if we had an opportunity, I'm looking at the spreadsheet that was part of the packet here, the orange ones here are the ones that I think would be helpful for us to have an opportunity for you to say, okay, we're evaluating person X here, do you have any comments? And if we choose to offer that, I think that would be very helpful. That would satisfy my concerns.
I agree. So let me just clarify, if I may. So, Mr. Purple, you're suggesting that any conversations or anything that we may have with the department head for, whether it be budget-related or an issue that someone may come forward to us for, you would like us always to check in with you. And I think typically we do that in most cases.
I'm not saying you don't, because you do.
I know.
Right, and the thing of it is because it's become ingrained, if you don't tell me, when I call that department head or talk to Chief Achilles or Karen Galligan or Pam, they'll say, hey, just so you know, so-and-so is down here having a conversation. So next time you stop in, I'll say, hey, Brian, I was talking with Pam, you were at the senior center the other day looking for such and such and everything and that, just so everybody's aware that everyone, there's no secrets and everything. So I just want to make sure that we all know, what's going on. That's all.
And again, it's process, Lisa, asking the question, if we're changing the process in any way, I just want to be clear, because I will be the least likely to try to I'll be the least likely person to violate it. If I'm clear on what you're asking us to do.
And Mr. Purple, I just want to make sure that, everything's a judgment call.
Yeah.
I know that I'm going to have conversations with Chief Paulus.
Yep.
It might be about how good the Blackstone Millville team is going to be next year. And which hasn't been very good lately. And we wade into some other area. The way I operate, and I suspect the way you want us to operate, is for judgment calls. If I have a conversation with him about how's this going, or I saw that, or something like that, that is that is somewhere between in passing to observational or
Yeah.
something like that. The last thing in the world I'm gonna think is, gee, I better make sure Mark is aware of this.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
That being said, if it's something where, Chief, could you track this down for me, or Karen, you know, I heard from this, and it particularly if it involves them doing, maybe diverting their
Yeah.
attention from something that you think.
Can we put an officer on Middle Road to do a speed, you know, a speed check and everything and things like?
Again,
Yeah,
I'm assuming that everybody's comfort with making those sort of judgment calls.
Of course.
yeah.
I see everybody,
Yep.
and it sounds like that's been done,
Yep.
in your experience, so.
But those things come back too, like, so when I see the chief and the chief and I are having conversation, yeah, Marty stopped down and, was showing him this and that. So those, those things will come up and everything too. So, like I said, I'm just saying, everybody playing with the same information. That's all.
I'm assuming email is fine for that, because normally when I do those kind of things, I will copy you on.
It is,
on
and like I said, I get several,
Karen or
I got one recently, looking for something, I'm copied on it. Okay,
Yep.
make sure I understand. The one thing I will say is that, if you're going, if you're reaching out to departments, I would suggest that you go to department heads and start there, rather than just going to one of the administrative people and start asking questions and stuff like that, and the department head's like, what's going on? And some of them may be okay,
Yeah.
again, under the same pretense. Okay, I'm fine if you want to go directly to this person, just as long as I make sure that I'm aware of what you're looking for, asking for, because maybe I can help you and take the burden off of the administrative person, so.
Lisa, that doesn't sound like a change.
No, I agree.
No.
Okay,
And
all right.
I was just making sure that
Yeah.
there wasn't a change
Okay.
to the process, because myself personally, I talk to Mark
Yeah.
almost every day, so he knows, if I talk to somebody, typically there's an issue.
I have a timer.
It does. And we always end on a happy
Yeah,
note.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
again, I just wanted to be clear that we weren't changing how it's currently being done.
All right, so Mr. Stivers, you said we're gonna skip over the centralized grant writer
Uh,
issue?
Nope.
Yeah.
Vanessa.
Yeah.
Vanessa has a
Mrs.
question.
Hale's got a question about the grant writer issue.
That's premature, but I just wanted to add, this is, a well-timed discussion relating to performance reviews. One thing the Personnel Board is doing this year is shifting everyone's anniversary date to July 1st. We've talked about this for years, it's kind of a messy thing to do in the very first year, because our employees have anniversary dates and raise dates, throughout a 12-month period. So we're doing that right now, which means we are having everyone submit their performance review by August 31st, for discussion by the Personnel Board during the month of September. So, any conversations relating to employees that the Selectmen, have purview over is, well-timed.
But that does not affect the contract employees.
No, it doesn't.
So, I think,
The majority of those.
I think
are
Sam's
checkpoints.
point, but I know it's been mentioned a couple of times when you talk, blue chief, red chief, DPW, finance director, obviously mine, and,
Not a copy.
no, I was gonna say, I think that's it. So, all of those happen at their anniversary dates. Those are not gonna change. Vanessa's just speaking to the SAP that falls under the purview of
Yeah, I'm
personnel
referring
board.
to our non-union staff that
Right.
are not department head contracts.
Okay.
Yep, okay.
The other thing that may happen, and I don't think I've been on the board long enough, but I'm sure that some of you have seen this, is you hear from residents about employees who are resident-facing, and you're getting good if you get good feedback, I think that's always something that you could give to Mark that he may not be aware of, too.
Yep.
Um,
We do get, and believe it or not, we do get letters,
Okay.
we get cards every so often.
Okay.
Hey, just wanted to let you know, this
Every
person
once in
does
a
a nice
while.
job, and Vanessa is the first one that says, that's great, get me a copy, I want to put it in the personnel file,
Yeah.
So it is, we do, and we get the other feedback too.
I wasn't going to say that.
I know, but
Wanted to
we,
keep the positive,
Put
right.
them in the file.
we hear both, and,
Yeah.
and Sam, just to take that one step further, is, may want to look at, doing, or putting in place some type of a, customer service survey. We did something like that in a couple of lives ago in another community where we actually had a program, that at every counter, there was postcards, okay? And they, and you could fill them out and everything, and that, you could take them away, and you could come back and fill them out. And, we had what we call mystery shoppers.
I was just gonna mention that.
Which is, you don't use them as gotchas, okay? But we would basically hire somebody to come in, and they would go to the assessor's department, and they would pose as a real estate person, and they wanted information on a property, and they wanted this, they wanted that. And then after the interaction happened, they would go back, and they would do a couple of different departments, and they would write up their interactions. And you don't use them as punitive, you use them as teaching tools. That, wow, you did this really well. Or, you know what, maybe moving forward, we need to look at these things and everything in that.
And then it becomes part of our employee training.
Correct.
Yeah.
For everyone to take
Yeah,
advantage of.
so we've, I've done that in the past and everything, and, with varied levels of success, sometimes they all come back and everybody's great. So,
which may be true.
Why are you laughing? I can see you laughing behind the mask.
Yeah, but we'll have to have more of a discussion, unidentified, or,
Mystery shoppers.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like a sting operation.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So, anyway.
Give us tips, though.
Yeah, no, it could be helpful, it just, let's.
Yeah. Catch somebody on a bad day or something, I mean, yeah, no, I know.
Do the satisfaction survey online,
Yeah.
God forbid.
I know,
that too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm almost done. Very close here. Centralized grant writer, recent success. As I watched various publications, there's a lot of money out there, federal money, COVID-related kind of things. This bill that Mark just mentioned is $459 million. It's got a huge list of things that it supposedly could fund. And I think there are a lot of things we could actually do there if we had somebody who is targeted, focused on it. There are people who do that very well. I got to believe that if we could find something like $30,000 to hire a part-time person for the next 11 months here to go out and find this money, they would earn their keep back many times over. So I think there's a timing opportunity here with the pandemic and other money that's flowing out there, things that the state and the federal government are trying to do. So to me, that's an important one to try to grab. Final point is we talked.
Let me stop you there.
I'm trying to get done.
You've almost convinced me. You've almost convinced me that a centralized grant writer. I guess this is more a question than anything else. We've got Framingham State. We've got colleges in Worcester. We've got Becker at least partially sitting on Route 9. It just strikes me that it might be the sort of thing that you could tie in with a university for, sort of recurring internships. Because I don't know enough about their curriculum, but I got to think that at least some of those schools have curriculums that are geared towards public administration.
Sure.
Because it's the sort of thing, on the one hand, you don't want to spend a lot of money to create the position, and particularly because you don't know. Again, as I said, you've almost convinced me. But you don't know how much money it's going to generate. It might be a lot. It might, as I said, you're almost there. But it just strikes me that might be something worth exploring. Is there an internship sort of framing that we can do and offer that as an opportunity? Have somebody, 20 hours a week, who's a junior at whatever, fill in the blank school, who's got responsibility for that. And, maybe if it's tied in with them getting credit, then it's even a lesser cost to the town. Anyway, that is my follow-up thought to what as I said, you've almost convinced me is a good suggestion.
Well, I've had good luck with interns. I think this one is a bit of a special case, in that as I look back at my sort of anecdotal experience with this, most effective people I've seen in the grant writing business are people who actually had worked with the state or federal government organization, who know the people in those places, know the process in those places. And I guess sort of my off the top of my head thought was, I got to believe we have people in town who may have had that kind of experience, who maybe dropped out of the workforce to raise a family or something like that, and are interested in a part-time deal to see how it works, as opposed to a younger person who may not have that kind of experience or contacts in the various agencies. I don't know. There are a variety of ways you could do it. I would much rather do it some way and not miss this window of opportunity than sort of sit back and wait for the perfect place to find money to do it.
Sorry, do you know if there are other towns surrounding us that may have a part-time grant writer that may be interested in part-timing for a structural as well,
well,
maybe?
Don't know for sure, but one of the EDC members is their business development person for Billerica, and has been
Yep.
hugely knowledgeable in terms of identifying opportunities, and seems to do this kind of stuff. I don't think he's necessarily available for us to hire, but that's the kind of person who, has done this for a living for the last 10 years or whatever in the Massachusetts environment.
In many communities, it's part of the community development department, or it might be a job function that is assigned to, someone in the organization as, one of their multiple tasks. But we can find out from the MMA, Sam, what communities have a part-time grant writer,
Yep.
and maybe look at what their model is.
I'd be interested in getting more information and
Yeah.
possibly pursuing.
Here's
I'm kind
something,
of like Marty, volunteer.
yeah, here's something to think about, and this is,
I got a half vote here.
you're in trouble if you're putting together half votes, Sam. One of the things to think about, and really has nothing specifically to do with what you're talking about, but when we talk about adding positions, whether it's a part-time position, a full-time position, never mind the ability to afford, never mind, the need or anything else in that. We've got to start thinking about where we're going to put these people, okay? I sat in on interviews for the part-time person for the IT position, and then Tom and I got to have the hairy discussion about where are we putting this person? Where are we putting you? If, is this person going to stay in the house? Is Tom going to be elsewhere? Is Tom's part-time person going to be elsewhere? How is this going to work? So we really don't have a lot of space. If you remember, the building department used to be in the townhouse. I was part of moving that
And the
to
Board of Health.
where it currently, on the Board of Health, where it currently is now, which is a great space. But there's that divide, there's that division. We don't have a lot of space. Capital planning, God bless them, they're taking a look at all of our properties and saying, can we downsize a little bit more? I don't disagree with the approach,
Yeah.
but we've got to look, where are we going to put these people?
This could be a remote job, in fact.
Yeah, no, I
It is an issue,
and I
yeah.
understand it could be, but if we're going to hire somebody, there is going to need to probably be some time in the office,
Yep.
doing some things. So, and we can't assume that, okay, we've got a 19-hour position here, that desk is available half the time, this person's going to just work opposite hours, which may not fit. So I just throw that out there for consideration. But the board's already said we're not hiring new people next year without any, new revenues or anything, so we don't have to worry about that. But I am worried about where we're going to put Tom's part-time person, so
Okay.
that's something that we'll need to figure out.
I just have a follow-up question, Sam. So are you thinking that this person would write grants for operational needs of the town or for project-based things?
Well-
Because I think a lot of what we're seeing is they want shovel-ready projects. So a grant writer is not going to solve, not going to come up with a plan for what we want to do, right? Like, they're going to have to be directed
Right.
as to what we're applying for. So I guess I'm just looking for your vision of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we ultimately, out of this discussion and like discussions that we're having, ought to come up with some priorities. For example, one of the things that I think Marty and I are aligned on is accessibility, bike trails, and that kind of stuff. That's
Okay.
something that I know is important to the state and to MassDOT, and so I think that there's more flexibility to do things that may not be fully shovel-ready there, I don't know. But the grant writer, hopefully, would have a task of figuring out, what's required for these projects, how do they fit the priorities that we select. We say these are the 3 or 4 key areas. Go find money that we can actually access, not things that we got to spend 10 years and $1 million engineering to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be flexible there, and I can't tell you precisely how that's going to work. Maybe we try it, and oops, everything needs to be shovel-ready, and we don't get any money, so it would be a bad bet. I doubt it, but you don't know till you try it.
One of the things, and I'm glad you asked the question because it went in a direction that reminded me of something. I recently had a conversation with Representative Dykema, and it came around this whole amount of money that she got, in this bill for us, if in fact it comes to fruition. all this stuff that normally would take months in order to develop and put in amendments and everything in that is now happening in a matter of days on some of these things, and they're going very, very quickly. And one of the things that Representative said to me would be helpful is if we've kind of got a standing list of things that we're looking for, these are things that are important to the board, these are ideas. So when something comes up, whether it's an economic, package, whether it's a capital bond bill, there are things that can look at and say, yep, this project fits. And we don't have to try and do a 4-hour scramble, to try to just push something in there that at the end of the day, is it real? It's important, but is it the most important thing? Is there something else maybe we wanted to, to try for? So outside of the grant piece, I think that it's probably incumbent upon the board at some point to, to put together a standing list. We can make sure that our representatives, on Beacon Hill have, that they can pull from when these opportunities come about, and we know, and we can keep adding to the list or taking things off, but it makes it easier for them to get these things in when the deadlines hit.
I think that's a great idea, and maybe a way to sort of get a ball rolling on that is obviously for us to think about it and things that we might put on a list, but touch base with the department head.
Sure.
And get 2 or 3 items from each of them. Number one, that might spark something in us that we hadn't necessarily thought of. But I again, just overall, I think what you just described is a great idea because, and this Sam is the main reason you've almost got me.
Let me write this down.
Is because it is, again, I've only been on the board for a year, but what's pretty clear to me is that the way Charlie Baker views the functioning of government is targeted grants.
Yeah.
And, it is remarkable to me with the frequency. On a monthly basis, there's, whatever state, department comes out with a list of the various grants that they've identified. I mean, again, it's, agree or disagree with the approach. That's the approach.
Reality.
That is his approach to government. And so, whose ever antennae, whether it's a grant writer or department heads or otherwise, I expect, Karen, although she wasn't successful, at least the first, the first round with the shared streets, obviously she's attuned to looking for those things, and I suspect that other people maybe are having a similar reaction to me, that this is how for the foreseeable future our government is going to function at the state level, which is we put pockets of grant money out there for you to target.
Yeah.
And that's why you've almost got it.
We want to go with the tide.
Vanessa's done the same thing, with the state's community compact program. It's like, okay, let's take a look at the categories, let's see, and then Vanessa has conversations with the departments, what do we think fits? Well, how does that work? And does it make sense, taking those and trying to put them all into, as Sam is envisioning it, a part-time position to do some of these things and just to hound dog.
It happens on an annual basis with our insurance company too. So there are, even more so to your point, this year, there's so much money out there.
Yeah.
And
you know what?
We have to find the time to get those grant applications in.
And I was too narrow because I said department heads. I mean,
Yes.
the committees.
Go there,
The
exactly.
committees, what are, what project, what are you thinking about that we can get behind?
Yeah.
Yep.
Our trails people have been terrific,
Exactly.
Yeah.
and I suspect that they could very easily put together a list. So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
overall, I think
Yeah.
your idea is a terrific one, Mark,
Yeah.
to have that, on a shelf, just, and so when that call comes from Carol Dykema, you don't have to reach out to all of us.
Put it on
and
Carol's shelf.
Scrambling,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah,
But it's on the shelf, just ready to pull down,
yeah.
and provide to her.
Yeah,
So,
because
that's a great idea.
Miss Malinowski's comment, that's a mouthful. Miss Malinowski's comment is probably been more accurate over my career, is that, if they're shovel ready, when this stuff comes around, they want to get that money out, they want to get it, working, and they want to be able to point to, see, here's what this money can do. So to the extent that we're ready when these things happen or become available, you know, that's really where you have your best
We sent an email
opportunity.
today to the executive director of MAPC, you know, on 2 different grant opportunities, you know, that we want to try and take advantage of. So, you know, every day there's some other email coming through.
And to Marty's point, given what we expect the governor is likely to do, I think that might focus us to say what project or 2 projects should we
Yeah.
aim to get shovel-ready
Right.
Yeah.
and be ready when some of these things happen.
So again, it's very short-term, Mark, is to put together an email to go to the department heads
Yep.
and to the various boards and committees saying,
I agree.
we don't want 25 items.
You can put 25,
And
but
if you
highlight
have 25,
4.
make sure a
Yeah.
limited number are highlighted.
Yeah.
9, I got 9. Right under the limit. Final point quickly.
Yes.
Contract services, we've talked about this, I continue to believe it makes sense. We don't have a zillion of these to make a list of what do we buy under contract. How do we think about rebidding those periodically, goods or services, dimensions or things like commodities where prices vary quickly. You probably don't want to lock in for 10 years. Rebid those. Other things, maybe small amounts you don't rebid every year kind of thing, but there's got to be a sort of guideline there, I would think, in terms of these kind of things we look at periodically. How long's it been since we looked at it? What does it make sense from a management standpoint to do? I think we could put that structure together very quickly, and that might be an interesting thing to look at. So that's it.
Just following up on that, it would be interesting to me, and I know one of the reasons we haven't done this in the past is I don't think it's fair, either in perception or reality, to focus on a particular contract.
Mhm.
And let's think about rebidding it. It's got to be global.
Sure.
But when you think about it in terms of global, I have no idea, which is maybe shame on me, but I have no idea how many different services the town contracts for. Obviously, legal services we're aware of, but I don't know, we may contract for some IT services.
Consulting.
I don't know.
Engineering, landscaping,
And
commodities,
so,
yeah,
and
less
so
than
that
50.
But
strikes
some, and some of those though, I mean, a lot of the DPW ones, they get rebid on a regular basis.
Sure. Yeah,
You
I'm
know,
not
but
saying
when
they
it
don't.
comes
Yeah.
to, when it comes to legal services, financial services, you know, some of those don't get bid quite as often. And then there's the conversation I think that, the board needs to be aware of, at least during, we're talking about this, is, sometimes you go out to bid so that you can make sure that you're still being competitive, or, that you're getting the best rate. And sometimes, you're going out to bid because you want something new. And sometimes, you've just got to make sure, when you're going out to bid, why you're going out to bid.
And sometimes rate isn't the key thing
Yeah.
that you're
It's
looking
not.
for, actually.
It's not. Sometimes to gain efficiencies or gain better services, and that you end up paying more.
I would guess there are fewer than 50 of these, just pulling a number totally off the top
I'm
of my
happy to
head.
put together something. I think it would be interesting to
It
understand.
may exist in the accounting department already. I don't know if it's 100% updated, but
Yeah.
we would start there and see.
So I can give you,
Every contract is supposed to be
Vendor.
filed at the top.
So I can give you a list by, by department, by, the service, by department and frequency. Whether it's a 3-year contract, whether it's a 1-year contract, whether it's just, that it's existing. So for example, counsel, we hire counsel. We don't, we hadn't put that back out to bid.
And when it was last bid, if you have that
Sure.
information, that'd be
Sure.
interesting. Yeah.
Chelsea, do you want to add anything to this? I know this was one of the things that was on your, high on your list.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like what Mark said, if we have to have a reason to go out to bid, and I also think, are we looking for a better service? And if we think we're gonna get a better service, we should look at what other towns are doing to make sure that if we do spend the time to go out to bid and go through the process, that we are gonna get something that we're looking for.
And I agree with all of that.
Yep.
But also for me, there's a peace of mind aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be a lot more comfortable if I just, again, the same way that there's up on the shelf, there's a list of projects that if funds become available, it just would be nice that on the same shelf, there were a list of all of the folks that the town of Southborough or a board or committee or otherwise in the town of Southborough is contracting with.
Yeah,
Again,
great.
just my peace of mind would be, you know, in a lot better shape if I had ready access to that. I'm not gonna know them all off the top of my head, and
Right.
99 times out of 100, there's never gonna be an issue or a question, but knowing it's there would be nice.
Right.
Whether anything's ever done with it, it's just good to know.
Good baseline data,
Agreed.
yeah.
Yeah.
You might look at that and say.
I'm happy to prepare that.
Mr. Stivers, you don't have any more highlighted.
8 minutes,
Oh,
that's
my
right.
gosh.
Not counting the questions and the extraneous comments.
I don't think it'll take very long for mine, I hope not, but unless I'm ready to start charging through. Okay.
Go for it.
The first one is just, I guess, Mr. Purple, this is one actually that just immediately gets tossed into your lap. And just, what steps, just make sure that we are aware, we are covered for all of the potential COVID-19 reimbursements, grants, we've talked a little bit about grants, et cetera, that the town is eligible for. And so I'll toss that immediately to you.
Sure.
From our conversations, it sounds like we're in pretty good shape along those lines, but maybe describe exactly where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a conversation with the town accountant today, and that's one of the issues with closing out fiscal 20 is because we're taking all of the COVID-related expenses, and the board had voted to establish that, you know, that fund, so that all those are going into that fund, which will then be submitted for reimbursement. Well, every time, you know, we go back and you know, checks with the departments, do you have anything else? Oh, yeah, I think this should go. So it's one more thing that's kind of preventing us from closing up shop on 20. You know, I know that the accountant has been very diligent. You know, she's been working with Neil Spazey, you know, and making sure that we're going to get this reimbursement correct. And, you know, there are things that now in fiscal 21 that we're still in, going to be incurring, you know, moving forward. The glut of them, I think, has been taken care of. You know, we're not seeing big things anymore. It's smaller things at this point. And, you know, I'm hoping that, you know, sometime, later this month and that we'll be submitting, you know, our reimbursement for, for these COVID-related items.
Okay, so you're confident that we are on top of all of this?
Yes, yeah, I think, you know, there's a good, you know, there's good, you know, the accountant is in sync with the departments, the need, because again, it's not every department. You know, you've basically got, you know, you've got police, you've got fire, you've got public works, you've got board of health, you've got town clerk, you know, there's some treasure issues. Everybody wants to make sure that the library, we're putting in for the bags, you know, for the curbside, but, you know, so I think we've taken a pretty broad brush approach in making sure that we've reached out to everybody saying, you know, things that and the schools are a separate entity. The schools have separate pots of money, you know, that they're pulling from, and I know that I've had this conversation with the superintendent. He's been pretty diligent about making sure that he's turned over every rock that he can. So I'm pretty comfortable that you know, that we've uncovered everything, you know, for 20, and we'll continue to track things in 21, and, you know, and make, you know, another submittal, you know, probably, you know, sometime, you know, in the fall.
So it sounds like that will be part of, a further discussion about this will be part of the...
On the 18th.
On the 18th,
Yes.
with the finance director.
Yep.
Perfect.
And just one question.
Sure.
We are submitting, even if the FY20 budget had savings from another area, we're still submitting for COVID-related costs, even if we had a budget to cover it.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second one is I've got it captioned diversity and inclusion. And I tried, you know, and there's no one-size-fits-all for the way a particular community approaches, you know, the issues that have come to the forefront in the last couple of months, which are diversity and inclusion. One of the ways we've already talked about, and that is looking at it from a housing, planning, zoning perspective. And it sounds like there's general agreement that we need a, sort of all hands on deck. And again, for a lot of this stuff, a lot of my items are just areas where it just seems to me that the Board of Selectmen need to be the drivers. And even if it doesn't fall squarely into our area, like, in planning and zoning, we don't do planning, we don't do zoning, but we can drive the process that brings a focus to that and make sure that it's prioritized. The other two areas, again, thinking about it from a systemic standpoint, are twofold. Number one is public safety. And I think we're incredibly fortunate in Southborough, with Chief Paulus and with the people that the previous boards of selectmen, the town administrator, and the police chief have hired, that we've got a pretty impressive group of police officers in the town of Southborough.
Yep.
That being said, I think it's incumbent upon us to take a good, hard look at our department, and put together a framework with Chief Paulus to make sure that issues of fairness in policing, I'm not saying they're not being properly addressed, but for us to have comfort that this is the system that's in place, these are the reporting lines that are in place, this is the training that's in place for his officers, to make sure that what, from my anecdotal observation, has not been a problem, an issue for our police department from a public safety standpoint, but that it doesn't become an issue. I guess twofold. Number one, that there hasn't been an issue that we've missed for some reason. Hopefully that's not the case. And number two, that we have systems in place that we're comfortable with from a training standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, and the other one has to do with more broadly than just the police department, but from an outreach and hiring standpoint, that we have a sensitivity, and we're acting on that sensitivity to make sure that, again, diversity and inclusion are part of our thought process, of our hiring process, of our, and again, particularly from a policing standpoint, because that's one of the main issues. So anyway, my thought about that is to, relatively early, and August 18th is a crowded agenda, but maybe as early as September 1st, and it gives Chief Paulus a month or so to think about it, and have one of the agenda items to have a deep conversation with him about these items and other items that other folks may have on the board and that Chief Paulus might have, to make sure that, again, from a training, from a reporting, from a hiring, and I suspect there's other items in there as well, that we're doing the right thing from a public safety standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think having the chief come in as well, he may be able to reassure people that may have a concern or wonder as to how our Southborough Police Department is dealing with some of these issues. So I think it's a twofold. I think it gives the chief an opportunity to share with us what's currently being done. I agree with you that we're very fortunate with the police department that we have, and I think recent incidents have shown that. And I think it speaks volumes for the staff that we do have.
Yeah, I mean, in my private world, where I'll constantly have conversations with people where, for whatever reason, we are being particularly rigorous about looking at somebody's performance or their hiring practices or things like that. And sometimes, people will get their back up a little bit, and I'll go, you're missing the point. If you're doing this the right way, you should be welcoming this opportunity, and that is my message to Chief Paulus. If he's watching, and in terms of communicating, we think you're doing things the right way. We hope you're doing things the right way. We hope that what we, at least again, my perception anecdotally, is that we're very fortunate in the way our public safety functions are operating in Southborough. But a rigorous examination of that, and again, making sure our processes, it should be taken defensively, and I don't think he will.
I agree.
But an opportunity to sort of reassure the community, reassure us that yes, in fact, we are doing things the right way, and we're cementing in processes and the like to make sure that we continue to do that.
I think the process the chief went through to get the department accredited you know, on a state level, and going through, and that required going through all of your policies, going through all your procedures, making sure you were doing things the right way. I agree, I think he'd welcome.
Yeah.
So, is that something you'll reach out to the chief and then
I will.
schedule him for one of our September meetings too?
And individually, if anybody, I mean, again, I had three things, you know, that I thought, again, you know, from a training standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, how does he make sure that if there is a report that somebody was treated unfairly, or that a comment was, whatever it is, what processes are in place to make sure that gets to the right people, and how is it papered to make sure that it's addressed. And then the final one is hiring, which leads into my discussion more broadly about departments. So anyway, if there's anything else besides those or that expand on those, shoot me an email, and I'll wait for a week or so to have my conversation with Chief Paulus. And this is just from both the training and the reporting perspective. Obviously, you know, DPW, recreation, they don't have the opportunity, the nature for the sort of contact with the community that a police department does, a fire department, rescue outfit. That being said, they do have two things. Number one, they have contact with the public, and they have customer service, you know, responsibilities and the like. And they also do hiring. And so I guess what I would like to include or suggest including in our discussions with the department heads, and maybe even as part of their evaluations, what sort of training do they have for their employees and for themselves on issues relating to diversity and equity? What sort of processes do they have in place that if, again, not a police context, to make sure that if there are issues raised from a customer service or otherwise, that those are reported properly, make their way to them, make their way to you, Mr. Purple, and again, are papered properly and also addressed properly from a supervisory and other standpoint. And from a hiring standpoint, I know that again, at our office, you know, on the one hand, we thought we had a perfectly, and probably did have a perfectly fair, in a general sense, hiring practice. But it wasn't, we changed it several years ago to make sure that not only were we, you know, conducting the review of resumes and interviews and everything like that in a fair and equitable way, but that outreach was an incredibly important part of that. And that you can be fair with who you interview and how you review it, et cetera, but you haven't necessarily been, not fair, but you haven't been as expansive as you could be in terms of who you are reaching out to make them aware of openings in your department. You know, there are an awful lot of people who might not even think about applying for a job in Southborough. But if Southborough is reaching out to them, you know, are we, I don't know, I don't know exactly how we post positions, you know, but are we posting them in positions that enhance our ability to get a broader, you know, and more diverse pool of people applying for it? And
I think this kind of all ties back, because Vanessa will speak very well on this. So but globally, this ties back to some of the, I think it was the thing that Sam had brought up in terms of personnel board, personnel director. And it's not so much the board, but the personnel functions in this town are very fractured, and they fall in various silos. So while, you know, it would be great, you know, Vanessa is very, very good and stays on top of how we should do things and you know, and how we should conduct interviews and how we should, you know, where we should do our outreach for hiring and making sure that we've got maximum diversity in our processes. But, you know, if it's an elected department, they may conduct their own hiring process. If, you know, you've got a strong fire chief, you've got a DPW director which operates under a special act which has full hire and fire authority, okay? So it's very difficult to put stringent standards in place that everybody has to follow because we don't have that centralized authority to do that.
I hear you, and I don't disagree with that, and I understand, and Ms. Hale, I don't want to, but
Go
that
ahead.
being said, this is important, you know?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I'm not interested in stepping on anybody's toes or
Yeah.
telling them how to do their department's job
Yeah.
or anything like that, but I think it is important for the town of Southborough, whatever the department is, that we make a statement that, in terms of the way we think about hiring, that, we are gonna do everything possible to make sure that, the pool of people who might consider working for the town of Southborough is as broad and diverse as possible.
And I
And
think
I
that.
can't imagine there's a department head who disagrees with
But
that
I think
statement.
it's extremely, you know, just because it's not being done doesn't mean this board shouldn't, you know, make a statement and should say, this is how we should be doing these things, and this is our expectation. And everything that comes before us, we're gonna want to make sure before, you know, we have something in front of us, that this is how it's been done. And this is the expectation for those departments that control your own hiring. You know, we're expecting everybody to do this as a town. I don't care elected, appointed, or otherwise. So I think that direction, that leadership should come from this board.
Marty, I think,
Yeah.
to Mark's point about, you know, there's a fair amount of autonomy out there, we actually vote on contracts for a lot of these folks. So I think making it clear that when your contract comes up for renewal, one of the things we're going to be looking at is what kind of job you've done in terms of diversity, inclusion, and so forth. So I think it's important to notify people on the front end so they have an opportunity to focus on that.
And the other, and just to pile on to that comment, Sam, is that some boards and committees which do the hiring for certain positions, you appoint those boards and committees.
Right.
So you know, so I guess your expectations can have longer tentacles in terms of, you know, reaching where you need to reach for, not everybody, but a majority.
But communicating clearly, I think, even places where we may not have as direct a connection,
Yes.
to communicate the expectation, I think that
Yep.
word sort of floats through
And I
the
don't think,
environment.
you know, maybe I'm too optimistic about this, well, I don't think so. I don't think we are ultimately gonna have to be particularly heavy-handed about this.
You shouldn't have to be.
You know,
I agree.
Yeah.
it really is one of those things where again, I'm going back to my office's, experience, where once, and I can't remember who, you know, whether it was our HR department or what, but, you know, just came up with a very simple idea that you need to be more proactive in, for instance, from a hiring perspective, identifying. And of course, you have a duh moment. You go, well, yeah, of course we need to be. And so it may be as simple as that,
Yeah.
that again, we provide that proactive push
Yeah.
to make sure that again, when the town of Southborough is hiring, this is how we're going about it.
Sometimes it's a forest for the trees issue.
But I think
It's too close.
The practice and the process, I think others would be hard pressed not to somewhat follow.
I agree.
I think it's a rigid standard, and it would be really hard
Yeah.
to not, to some level, follow that.
So now, implicit in everything that I've been saying is, you know, some towns have put together diversity, inclusion, equity committees. I think the Board of Selectmen should have ownership of that in Southborough. And I don't think we need, you know, we're a small enough town, it's a small enough universe for us to be responsible for making sure that again, having this conversation to make sure that the systems are in place from a public safety standpoint, from a hiring standpoint, to try to push on the housing diversity. I think we should own that as opposed to setting up a separate, you know, again, some towns have done it, some towns haven't. I just think I'd be more comfortable with us owning it.
I agree.
And it seems like everybody's nodding.
I would too, yeah.
I think Mrs. Hale would still like, a moment of your time.
Once I start going,
That's
All right,
all
go ahead.
No, you know, I know the board has a lot on their plate, but, you know, I think this, particular topic is such a critical priority for our community. There are a lot of folks that attended that vigil this summer that really want that conversation to continue. As you hit the nail on the head, Mr. Chairman, as far as the recruiting group goes, we have a lot of room for improvement in this area. You know, it's little things like, well, we don't do blind resume review. You know, we don't reach out to professional diversity networks. You know, we stick with a very narrow area. I've had conversations with department heads over the summer about, advertising in some of those areas. They didn't want to spend the money on it. You know, I think spending another $200 or $300, you know, to get our ads posted in some of these areas is, again, you know, seeing the forest through the trees is so important. You know, it becomes very difficult because a lot of our employees are appointed by elected boards. You know, so to, you know, Mr. Purple's comment earlier, you know, that's, having the tone set from the Board of Selectmen, you know, I think is really important. We don't have a Human Rights Commission. We don't have a Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We really, frankly, are a little late to this conversation, in my personal opinion. Because we haven't spent a lot of time talking about it, and I think it's really critical at this point. So, you know, I could make a list of a dozen things that I think, you know, Southborough could do better in this area. But it starts from recruiting. Our workforce is you know, not a diverse workforce. But I think we have to start by doing more outreach and spending the money, even though, you know, it is money that, you know, might not be in a particular budget. You know, finding money to work on recruiting in these particular areas is an important point.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, well, I since we have at least some control over the purse strings, you know.
So she will work
that
directly
makes
with you to put together a plan for consideration.
No, that's great to hear.
Hey,
Good.
Marty?
Yes.
Quick comment. I think that, I agree with you that we're accountable and we ought to take the lead in it. I think that the reason is we are actually best positioned to make something happen here versus creating another committee. So if we actually do that and nothing happens over the next 3 months, 6 months, or whatever, then I think maybe we have a conversation about a committee to sort of hold our feet to the fire potentially. I
Or
hope
shame
that,
on us.
Yeah, I hope that
Yeah.
won't be necessary. I also think it's important for us to think about some metrics as we go forward to figure out, are things happening, what are we doing, and maybe report on those kind of things periodically that would reinforce the commitment to it. So I'm not sure what those metrics would be, but that would be an interesting conversation too.
Well, again, I think that is, that would fit very easily and nicely with again, from a training standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, from a hiring standpoint, into the evaluation
Yep.
of the department head.
Yep.
Yeah, we use an online applicant tracking system now, and I think that's, you know, an easy way, Mr. Cyrus, for us to track those metrics. It can tell you, you know, where the job posting was pulled from. You know, was it the MMA? Was it LinkedIn? Was it, you know, a diversity network of some type? So
Yeah, and it can be a little, again, it can be frustrating because again, you know, Southborough was in a little island, and it's not the easiest thing in the world for the outreach to bear fruit, but you got to start
Yeah.
with the outreach.
Yeah,
Right.
but, you know, Vanessa says that all the time. You know, you know, the results may not come out the way you want. We may not get, you know, a big group of diverse candidates in that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Right. Bingo.
So, you know, we have to, you know, you have to make the efforts, you have to do the outreach, and then, you know, hopefully that bears fruit.
Okay, next on my item is our meetings and other boards and committees. Listen, I mean, I don't have too much of an issue with or idea about our meetings. The one thing, particularly when we're on Zoom, is the possibility, I felt badly a couple of times when, you know, particularly in looking at our agendas, we're gonna have some long meetings coming up, where, because we have public comment at the end, that, you know, somebody's been, you know, you kind of have to wait around for a long time for your opportunity to public comment. So anyway, my thought was to maybe do it twice, and maybe have a public comment right when the meeting, is there something somebody wants to bring up? Great, give them the opportunity, and if you want to go on to your business, fine. And then, after we've spent however much time, have a second opportunity for, so just bookend it.
Yep,
I
like
So, you know, we've done it both ways as well. We used to have public comment at the beginning.
Right.
I switched to, when we went to Zoom, to having it at the end.
Mhm.
And I think when we had live meetings, I think I led with it, and a number of times, we had a public hearing scheduled that night, then I would come to it later. But typically, when we were meeting live up at the townhouse, we'd try to do it up front at the beginning. But with Zoom, some of the feedback was if people were having difficulties logging in, then they would have missed that opportunity to
Yep.
participate in public comment. So when we did the Zoom meetings, I had put it at the end, but there's no reason why we couldn't.
I think
And,
that's a
and,
great idea.
the purpose of public comment is usually, Ben, for issues that aren't on the agenda. I want to bring something up, I want to bring something to the board's attention, which, could maybe generate an agenda item at some point in the future. Because the board has always said, there's been a couple of times someone's got up and said, I want to talk about this. Oh, okay, well, that's coming up on our agenda as an item, so if you'd like to hold your comment until then, we'll take comments when the item comes
Yeah.
up. So I don't know that you need to do it twice, but, figuring out where you want to do it and understanding that those are things, things that aren't on the agenda that you want to bring to our attention or talk about, that's the time to do it. So I think you just need to pick a place. And we've tried it both ways, and
I think I'm gonna pick two places.
I like
Okay.
that, right, 'cause
I
again,
like
if
that.
somebody's.
that hasn't been tried yet, so why not? Okay.
Traffic,
And again, if I'm right, then great, I was right, and having it at both ends. If I'm wrong, that's fine, then we can decide which seems to work better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Much better to try twice.
like it.
and then just from I love the fact that, on Thursday or Friday, not just our agenda comes out, but all of the documents
Yeah.
relating to that agenda come out. And I understand that we've got more, administrative support than other boards and committees. But again, I don't want to have it be a dictate or a mandate or something like that, at least not yet. But to sort of push our other, particularly committees that we appoint, but even more broadly than that. Again, because I think, Sam, you're right. If we set a good, if we articulate this as something that's important to the town,
Yeah.
then it makes it much more difficult for somebody to say, well, screw that.
Yeah.
We're not going to do it. Well, then, eventually you get isolated, and why aren't you doing it?
Right.
And I just find it incredibly valuable to have that information. I suspect that people who are trying to follow our business find it incredibly valuable to be able to pull up what it is we're going to be looking at.
Yep.
Yep.
And maybe, Mark, your thoughts on the best way to get some are already doing it, I think, but to make sure that, we sort of move in the direction of having all of the committees and ultimately maybe all the boards who have meetings to really just as simple as to post with your agenda all of the materials that you're going to consider in that meeting.
Right.
Seems pretty simple.
You set a deadline for when, if something's going to be on the agenda,
Yep.
I need to have the backup materials for it by this time certain, so you can post the agenda and the packet material at the same time.
So is it simply, Mark, what's the best way to communicate that to boards and commissions other than us, voicing, sort of general, agreement with it at this meeting? What's the best way to do it?
I think it's probably best coming from the chair, that this is what we would like to see, and going out to the chairs of the committee, of the various boards and committees.
All right.
But to a point that, this is how we do, and we're trying to, more transparency and things like that, and this is what you expect.
All right,
I think
done.
the other piece, which is a little afield of what you're talking about, is just staying on top of minutes and things like that. I have conversations with a lot of you that, well, I wanted to look something up and I can't find it, and my knee-jerk is, well, just minutes. The minutes aren't there. I haven't seen minutes for a period of time. There's still the issue. I think it was you, Mr. Chairman, that had asked about CPC reports, right? Was it you? Yeah. And 2015 or 16, I think, is the last one that's up online, and I made several requests, for CPC, just to get those reports up so that people look at them, because that's why we end up with public records requests and everything, and that's why whenever I get a public records request through this great software, which I believe was part of a community compact grant initially, is that I make sure that all the results of those are published. So people so people can go in and they can look at them and they can see the results of them, and all of that is laid out there. But that's what happens when you can't find the information readily. I've got to go asking for it, and I've got to make somebody work twice as hard as they should. So,
I feel people's pain though
Yeah.
on the minutes,
Yeah.
just because they don't have the administrative support that
support.
we do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you at all.
yeah. And minutes, good minutes are tough to do.
Yeah.
Tough to do right, and, you know,
There we go.
we're very
Very
fortunate, like I said, to have somebody who does them well. And, when I got here and the woman who was doing them and that, her minutes were great. And then, when she decided she didn't want to do it anymore, trying to find somebody to pick them up, I mean, I was told by the board that my minutes stunk, and they didn't want me doing them anymore, when I was trying to fill in on stuff. So it's very difficult to do and do it well.
So maybe what I'll think about doing is a gentler nudge in the communication to the committees. A stronger nudge with respect to the packets, but a gentler nudge with identify any issues relating to minutes and let's see if we can reach some, meet some sort of standard about getting them. Because you're right, I mean, I've looked at some boards,
Yeah.
trying to find out stuff legitimately, and it's like, what's the last?
I mean, look, this board knows better than anybody. There's requirements as when we're supposed to, and when you're supposed to have them done and approved, and if not approved within the time period, a draft version, and so.
Raja was sitting down there going, wait a minute, you're talking about process?
Yeah.
Haven't had a chance to talk yet?
She just lights up when we say
Like
process,
Kathleen.
so.
Can we just go back to the pre-meeting packets for 1 second?
Yep.
So there are probably going to be some boards and committees, smaller committees, that may not be clear on, they don't have staff, so how are they going to go about getting it all together? So I think we need to, if we're going to institute this, that we'd like everybody to do this through, and I hate to give more work to Vanessa or Mark, but I think they need to be able to have someone they can go to and say, well, this is what I have, and how do I go about doing this, and getting it to the clerk and doing whatever.
Yep.
I think we need to offer some level to start. I mean,
Yep.
eventually they need to learn how to do it, and, eventually it's our boards and committees' responsibility.
And one, just.
Go ahead, Ryan, that was it.
Just to tag on to that, and, recognizing that some boards and committees don't have the administrative help. But if they do have website, if there's a document that they can make sure that is posted on the website and is publicly available.
Yeah.
Within 48 hours, or as concurrent with the posting of the agenda. And I'll just pick on planning board as an example. If somebody submits, a number of drawings and reports for an item that they're going to consider, not necessarily put the burden that it has to be in a packet that's posted on the website, but, a link to all the documents associated with this is on the planning board website.
No, that's a very good point.
And they do a good job of that generally.
Exactly. I'm not saying they don't at all. They
Yeah.
do, and I think that's a good resource, though, for other boards and committees, if they all have a page
As an example.
on the town's website, and if they can, be instructed how to upload files and documents there. Again, I think the key point is making sure that information is available concurrent with the agenda.
No, I agree with that completely. And Lisa, I agree with your point. It is, I think it's, in a lot of respects, it's a mindset.
Agreed.
Because if they're gonna have a meeting on Wednesday, they're gonna have to have the stuff for Wednesday.
I agree.
It just means thinking about it 3 or 4 days earlier.
Right, and how do you get it up? I mean, and again, I'm just saying, not everybody's tech savvy, some of our committees may have people that aren't as tech savvy. So I think it's all about the guidance that we can give.
Yep.
If someone has a question how to do this, if they go to Mark, they can go to Vanessa, we let them know who they can go to. Typically, if you show somebody something once, they can do it themselves after that.
And I think a lot of times too, it's, the town clerk has been very good about, okay, if you're gonna send me this and you want me to post this, this is what I need, this is what how he's been good about, saying this is how I need it, and helping you to figure out how you need to give it to him so that he can make sure it gets posted correctly.
No, I agree, but if we're giving the directive, we shouldn't be adding on to the clerk's responsibility.
Correct.
When he doesn't fall under us, he's kind of his own island, so
Right.
to speak, because he's elected. So again, it's just a matter of how we want to give, who do we want to pinpoint when you give this, directive, this is the best way to do things. It's, you know, the board completely agrees, and I agree, transparency is always the answer.
Yep.
And,
So if you want to go a little slowly on this, Mr. Chairman, maybe this is something that, you know, that the new part-time IT person could help with, because, you know, I can see the face under the mask that he's making over there with regards to, because I looked at Tom, and Tom didn't look at me. Because, you know, it's like, okay, so I'm going to have to help to facilitate, you know, helping people get things in the format that we need to and do things like that. And he's an excellent teacher. It's just a lot more time. So
We also have templates. I got a call the other day from a board, you know, who wanted a template, you know, for meeting minutes, because they really weren't sure if they were doing it in the right format, you know, was it really, you know, up to par? So, you know, I think we could spend a little bit more time in enhancing some of our, you know, template type of documents that would be user-friendly.
And I have no appetite for being heavy-handed about any of this.
Yeah.
Again, believe me, the fact that people are willing to volunteer their time, but, you know, more, please.
Major plus.
It's not to be heavy-handed, it's to, I think, make their job easier, because if the information is out there, then folks who are interested are more likely to, you know, weigh in, et cetera. So I don't plan on being heavy-handed, but, I'll talk with you, Tom, and you, Vanessa,
Sure.
and maybe figure out the right tone for communication.
Yeah.
To make it clear.
Brian writes a great letter.
I can be a nice guy. I have to work harder at it, but I can be a nice guy.
I have one point to that.
Yeah.
To Lisa's point, I don't think this is as big a lift as maybe people think, because I attend a lot of these meetings, and very frequently, material actually has been sent out to board members or committee members a few days before the meeting. So the material is there, it's available, and I think really the issue is largely the how. How do we do it?
Exactly.
And if we can help with that, I think we'll see
And
a
thinking
real
about
jump, real jump in support for it. And there may be a few holdouts that you got to work on, but I think we can make great progress with a little bit of technical
I
help.
agree.
And the last thing on the meetings is just Southborough Access Media.
Sorry, can we just go to the minutes?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I've also watched some committee meetings where they've approved the minutes, and then they don't get posted. So they've done all the work, and there's no issues with them, but they're not loaded. And there's that letter from the clerk's office saying, I'm looking for your minutes from X date, and some of them go back as far as January. So I think we need to maybe look at the list from the clerk's office and reach out to those folks and say, do you need help with this, or kind of what's the holdup, especially if they're already approved. I don't know why they're not posted.
Yeah, that doesn't make a
There
lot
are,
of sense.
so,
No, that's worthy
so
of.
it seems
Follow up,
like something's just getting held up for whatever reason, but they're done.
Yeah.
Well, they appear to be done.
Well, and part of that may be that some of those emails that are going from the clerk's office saying that, you don't have these minutes are going to town email, and some people don't look at their town email.
Yeah.
Right? So this all ties back.
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a whole other.
Yeah, well, just curious, with that, how many people, were participated in the training last night about town email?
I believe it was 15 that participated live, and then I had at least 4 that watched the recording.
Oh,
Okay.
pretty good.
Do you know how many boards and committees, different boards and, yeah, how many different boards and committees were represented, do you, offhand? Okay, all right.
Okay. Just Southborough Access Media, and just, I mean, obviously they do a terrific job for us, but it's both sides of the coin, both boards and, we're in a weird environment because of Zoom, everything and the like, but, eventually we're gonna go back to actually meeting in person and really try to push, as many boards and committees as possible to televise.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people have gotten used to
Agreed,
being able to watch
Yep.
all the meetings. I mean, I've gotten used to it, I'll
Yep.
go on the elliptical and, I entertain myself by watching the historical commission meeting,
Everyone's sick.
Huh?
Sick.
Yeah. You work out a lot longer than you expected to, because you.
Well, some meetings, please end. No, my legs are getting tired. So, but anyway, just generally, it's nothing we have to decide or anything tonight, but just, you know, eventually we're gonna come out of Zoom, and I think an awful lot of people have gotten used to being able to watch
Yes.
everybody's meetings. And it's a terrific way to follow what's going on in town.
This was actually a directive from this was actually a directive from the selectmen at one point. You know, we'd like to see more meetings televised.
Yep.
And silver lining for everything that's going on, you can now, you know, you've actually got that.
Is there,
Some of the holdouts, actually, I think, are now on board in terms of they're comfortable with Zoom. I expect that we'll find it much easier to get people
Yeah.
to support that through Sam later on.
so Sam can't be at every meeting though, so is there a way that we can wire our meeting rooms
Yep.
so that we don't need to have somebody physically there to manage that?
Strikes me as an IT question.
We can discuss, phone calls.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah.
thank you.
But yeah, very much along those lines. How do we maximize?
Yep.
Eventually, again, right now it's amazing when you go to the YouTube site.
Yep.
I mean,
Mhm.
you know, you've got this whole,
Yeah.
you know, Chinese menu. Oh, do I want to watch that? Do I want to watch this? I mean, it's nice.
Yeah,
It's
one-
almost as good as Netflix.
Very,
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
It's almost as good as Netflix.
Yeah.
Close.
What window do I want to click?
Yeah.
One other thing I will just say really quick is that by watching some of these other committee meetings and everything, boards and committees that don't get public attending them, that don't have anybody else in the room with them, is the fact that some boards and committees struggle a little bit on how to run a meeting. And they have reached out to both Vanessa and I, a couple, and said, we'd like to get some training on that. And we've struggled to try to find some type of training. And so, you know, we're reaching out to our other peers in other communities and how, you know, what have you done? How have you done? Because there really is not a good, you know, a tool that we found so far in terms of training boards and committees how to run good meetings.
Could I make a suggestion on that?
Sure.
I've seen a number of those meetings myself and been struck by that. I mean, I think there is a very simple first-order solution, which is the half-page checklist.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
here are the things you need to do every meeting. Simple things like have a roll call vote, and when you vote on minutes, for example, the roll call vote, and when you vote to adjourn the meeting, I've seen a number of meetings that, okay, we're done, goodbye kind of thing.
Yep.
So and that's not a huge thing, but the basics, I think, are very simple in terms of these steps that are critical in terms of, you know, complying with the requirement that
Right.
people are more than willing to do if
Yep.
they know what to do. So to me, a one-page or
Cheat sheet.
one-paragraph
Yeah.
email memo to the board chair saying, just a reminder,
Yeah.
everybody's probably doing this, but
Yeah.
just keep this in mind as you do these meetings. I think people would appreciate that.
Now, Mr. Chairman, Tom's done a great job of writing up a script like that. I think it might be
Right.
something that we need to send a refresher to all our chairs of our boards and committees, because, not everybody has really gotten that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought I'd seen something like that. That's,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Well, you and I reviewed it, actually.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't,
Part of it is, I know at least a couple of committees who actually really aren't on town email yet, so I'm sure it got sent to them. But as we clean up that process, I think we'll have better communication as well.
Yeah, but see, it all circles back to the town, you know, we've got, everybody, all boards and committees are on town email. They just don't use it.
Yeah.
And also too, I think, a checklist is great, but I think that our boards and committees also need to understand not going off topic when you have an agenda and the public's watching, you stick to the agenda, and I think that's one of the important things I've seen since
Yeah.
I've been watching Zoom. And again, I don't think anybody's doing anything intentional or trying to do anything wrong, but it's just, they're so not used to having meetings taped and being on camera that your flow tends to be a little bit different.
yeah.
And I think it's just a refresher to everyone to understand that per open meeting law and, you know, the requirements, is you kind of stick to your script of what's here.
Yep.
That's still part of the half-page cheat sheet
Exactly,
thing. that,
exactly,
don't
just to
forget
reiterate
yeah.
that as well.
So Tom, I'll loop back on that with you as well. Great. So I'm zipping through the downtown and village initiative. Just the very simple thing to that is it's a theme that I've hit a couple of times tonight. And I think I've said this before. I think we've been EDC has been doing a great job with the downtown initiative. Occasionally, we've left them out on an island a little bit. And, you know, to the extent that good, positive things happen with the downtown initiative, and again, you know, with I hope everybody thinks what I think, and granted, I'm biased, but that Main Street is starting to look really nice.
Yeah.
Even with all the construction still, and I think it's really gonna be nice. And then, hopefully, we clear up the issues with the extension through the rest of Main Street. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to maintain momentum, to really do some nice things, downtown. And I think we have to, be willing to drive that process, and not just leave it to the EDC. And because we can, there are other stakeholders, there's, the planning board obviously has an incredibly important role with zoning and the like. And, they can always, decline our invitation, but we can certainly issue an invitation to come in. We want to, this is important, we want to talk, we want you at the table to be talking about this, so that we're not going down this road, and it turns out that planning had a completely different view of what we should be doing.
Yep.
And having all those stakeholders at the table. And there are others as well. I mean, I've talked to Catherine from the Trails Committee, and how to tie that in, and I'm going to get to bikes in a minute. So anyway, it's not to do it, but just that whether, I think it's probably going to be on a September agenda, which is, and to invite as many stakeholders as possible to come in and let's talk about this downtown initiative and see if we're all on the same page, and if we're not, why not, and how do we get there?
Yep.
Right, zoning board as well
Yep.
involved in that too,
Okay?
So do we have a status of where EDC's at with their plan, and can we review that on our own before we meet with them?
They're on version 3.
We can do that. We can have them come in like September 1 and,
Okay.
or September 8th, I guess it's going to be. And then with the idea that, September 22nd, then we have a broader meeting,
Okay.
something along those lines.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Next one, I think this is something, I think it's a good idea, and it's sort of along the line, it fits in, Sam, with what you were talking about in terms of Route 9. I just think that it could be an important function for us to open and generate lines of communication with our businesses. And are we doing things, or could we be doing things that are helpful to them? Obviously, again, the EDC did it, completely independent of us. We're able to, identify, a decent pot of money for some of the smaller businesses, but also the big businesses on Route 9, and get a sense for what they're thinking. Does it make sense to do, sewage? Does that make sense? Or are they going to go, that's crazy, we don't need that. This is what, you want to spend some money, or you want to get some, this is what you should be doing. So I don't have a particularly developed idea on exactly how to do those sort of roundtables, but that's my thought, that we should be thinking about how to, whether it's in September, although September already sounds crowded, in October, maybe start off with some of our, if it's going to be tied to the downtown initiative, our small businesses down there, and invite them, in through Zoom to have a discussion,
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
EDC used to actually go out and talk to business owners around town. I don't think they've been doing as much of that recently. Feedback I heard on that was always very positive, and surprised the business owners would say, gee, I'm amazed that you're knocking on my door. I think it might be an interesting idea for us to divvy up some of that and go out and call on some people, not only business owners, but developers, as we're talking about Route 9, to say, if you are thinking about putting money into Southborough, what kind of things would be interesting to you and motivating and whatever.
Yeah, because maybe it's a lot easier to get them to come to, to sit down 6 feet apart, at Morrow's, than it is to say, come to one of our meetings.
Yeah, exactly.
If I may kind of tag onto that, Sam, so one of the things that Brian Schiffer and I had done was, I would go with Chris Robbins, and we would go to individual businesses. You would have a selectman go with an EDC member. You would have a conversation. We met with the president of at the time, it's now Reliant, over on Newton Street. The person in charge of the facility came in. We had a great conversation about, letting them know that the town is interested, the town values them being in the town, and it carries great weight. And I know through other times, I mean, all of us, Brian, I'm sure you have conversations as well, being on the board. We've done this, but maybe to put a more concrete program in place. It was very successful. We met with the Bin, and I mean, there's a whole list of people that, we just went in and had a conversation. Sometimes it was 5 minutes, sometimes it was an hour, but it was letting them know that we valued them as a business in the town of Southborough, and anything that we could possibly do to help them, and just to let them know that we're here and.
Yeah, that's the framework for the sort of thing I'm
Yeah,
thinking
so
about.
it's already we've done it in the past. We could certainly change it and do better even, but I mean, it was just a quick thing that was thrown together that we started doing, and it was wildly successful.
So think about it, I'll put
Great
it on
idea.
an agenda at some point and we can sort of crystallize exactly the way we go about it. Maybe everybody's interested in doing, we'll talk about it, anyway. The community center is interesting, and I had a conversation with Kathy Cook about this. That clearly is one of the large capital items that folks in town have talked about for years and years and years. And so when I say thinking outside the box, I am about to jump back in the water with our various pilot entities, and one of the things I'm at least going to take their temperature about is whether or not there's a community center concept that might include our private schools. In other words, is there a way to think about the community center that serves the interests of the town of Southborough, but also maybe provides something that the schools don't have, and in a way that might enhance our ability to fund something like that. So anyway, that's why I say in terms of thinking outside the box, it is, anyway, so I have no idea. My conversation with them might be, are you out of your mind? And that's fine, it wouldn't do the first time.
But,
I mean, you're sitting in a public-private partnership,
yeah,
right?
This-
So this.
I was just gonna go down that road, that this was an out-of-the-box concept.
Yep.
When we were thinking of improvements to or new public safety, it was always focused on, how could we modify what we have already?
Yeah.
This came up, all sorts of light bulbs went off, and so this is a great opportunity. I think something like that has to happen for the community center. I'm the one who stood up in front of town meeting to convince everybody to purchase that building back in '03, whenever it was.
Yep.
And if you go back, as part of that presentation, it probably included discussion about, we'll have it short-term use for the senior center, and long-term, we have plans to build a new community center on that parcel.
Geological timeframes, short-term.
And we're
long-term.
pushing 20 years now on when that happened.
But things like there's a large landowner up on Newton Street.
Yep, oh, yeah.
And there's a big piece of, anyway, I just think for a community center to happen, there's gonna have to be some creative thinking.
I agree.
And, trying to tie in the schools, again, identifying some large landowners who are incredibly philanthropic in their view, and might be intrigued with assisting the town in that way. Again,
Can I add one?
I think it's worth the effort. Yeah.
One dimension to that, not only landowners, there are actually some very wealthy people in Southborough. And so.
I've noticed that.
And sometimes the concept of having something named for their family is an interesting thing. I think that we could actually do a little bit of targeted outreach to have some of those conversations and look for interest. And some of those people don't own a lot of property, particularly in town, but might have roots in the community, might be interested in talking with us about it.
So we're some brainstorming down the line, but I'm going to make some initial treaties and see what happens. So, all right, number 7 for me is spikes. And I talked to the, if you look, I used to be a more avid biker than I am, although I'm convinced I'm going to start doing it again. But there are a lot of them in Southborough. And it's sort of interesting, there are these great rails to trails places around that touch upon Southborough. They go to, you know, they come through Sudbury and they go to Framingham, and then the one that starts in Milford and goes down, and then there's a terrific one that goes down in my old neck of the woods. It starts in Worcester and goes along the Blackstone River.
Yeah.
And eventually, that's going to Newport, you know, all the way along the Blackstone River and then along Narragansett Bay. And so, I guess my question to the trails people was, is this within your jurisdiction? Do you want it within your jurisdiction? Because there's also kind of a mountain biking aspect to it that's not allowed right now on the state properties that are trails. I think that should change. And their advice, pointing to some other towns, is it makes sense to have a separate, whatever you want to call it, but that is specifically related to bikes. I think, you know, this whole COVID-19 thing has sort of underscored that having that method of transportation is a pretty nice detail, and there's really no reason why Southborough can't be a leader in that area. So the question is, for maybe some discussion in, you know, one of our meetings down the line, does it make sense to think about a bikes, you know, the same way we have a trails committee, rec, et cetera, to have a committee that's focused. Believe me, I can, off the top of my head, come up with the bicyclists in town that might be very excited about undertaking that. So anyway.
Yep.
And the Southborough Century, I mean, you know, centuries are 100-mile races, or you can do 100-kilometer races if you only want to go 60 miles, which isn't all that far for somebody who really bikes. But, I mean, something along those lines, and again, that kind of ties to number 10, which is coming up in a minute.
We're set with that, that's 500 laps around the Neary track, right?
Yeah, but they have, I mean, you could do it, watch you sitting back, you know, but getting the roads cleared for that is hard.
Yeah.
But you could do, you know, you could pretty easily come up with a, you know, 5, 6, 7 mile loop in Southborough. And you do that 7 or 8 times, and you've got a 50, 60 mile race.
Yeah.
You know, and you can have a 15-mile race for younger kids. You know, the Gobble Wobble was a couple hundred people the first year they did it, and now they're turning away after they hit 1,200 or something like that. And I just think that it's thinking about something like that, again, with our main streets, it's about to be, you know, a little bit of a treasure, I think. And, you know, tying that to what clearly is a big deal initiative, which is bikes, I think that would be a good thing for us to be thinking about. Okay? Number 8, we can do, that's just thinking about our town departments and particularly our committees and whether or not we should take a look at their descriptions and everything like that. That's for later. Number 9, we've already kind of talked about, which is the coordinated budget discussions. I really think we're on track to do that with capital planning and with advisory. As I said, I got a nice conversation with Kathy Cook and you know, they've got their, we talked about Chelsea using the liaison with advisory and tell them to, you know, stay in their place. But, I think we're gonna have a fine working relationship with them. The one thing is, and I'm, get some thoughts on this, the best way, you know, both on an annual basis and longer term, to incorporate the schools into our budget discussions. And I don't have any particularly good ideas about that, and we don't have to decide it tonight, obviously, but maybe think about, you know, the good thing is, I'm not even sure who the regional chair is, but I think I've said this before, the Roger Challen is the chair of the Southborough School Committee. He's the most reasonable guy in town. So if we have a good sort of blueprint for how, sorry, no, you're reasonable. One of the most reasonable people in town. Shoot.
One of the many most reasonable people.
But anyway, some thought about how we incorporate the schools so that, again, we don't end up in February with their budget sort of dropping in, and having to adjust to that. Again, don't need to even talk about it tonight, obviously don't decide tonight, but ideas are down the line about the best way to do that. And then my last thing is 1727. I was struck when I was looking at it must have been Concord or Lexington, one of them, you know, 1775. And they already have stuff in place for their 300th anniversary of Lexington and Concord. And every day when we come in and out of Southborough, we see 1727.
Yeah.
You know, it's only 2 years later. And just, I think we should start thinking about what kind of a committee we want to put together, you know, it's 7 years away, but 7 years are gonna click by pretty quickly, with the sort of thing you want to, we're only gonna turn 300
Yeah,
points.
yeah.
And the next big one is 100 years from then, and some of you may still be around, but I don't know. I got too many comorbidities.
Counting on it, yeah.
But anyway, to think about what we want to start, how we want to put together a committee to start thinking about what we want to do for Southborough's 300th anniversary. And maybe we have a big bike race.
I think it's a great opportunity for a sense of community kind of thing. So
Agreed.
I think we ought to focus on bringing as many people into that as we can, make it a really big deal community-wide, include schools and everybody, basically.
And again,
All kinds of things like Heritage Day.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It brings people together. You could do that at so many different places. People could stop all around town.
And the earlier we start thinking about that, I think it would be entirely reasonable to at least have the contours of what a committee would look like,
Yep.
In place in fiscal year, 21.
21, yep.
You know?
I agree.
Because it will, if we do it right, it's gonna take a lot of planning, and, as I said, I was struck when I saw all the planning that's already in place for 1775, in Lexington and Concord. So, that's number 10 on my list. So, and everybody seems to be nodding, so I'll take it that's
Sounds good.
I'll place that on an agenda at some point down,
Yeah.
in October or so and get input from, our other boards and committees and just the town of Southborough generally. And one of the things that's frustrating is I look at all these surveys and, 200
I
people
know.
respond,
Yeah.
So think about a survey and a way to get 500, 800 people responding to a survey about what they want to do for the 300th celebration.
It's a great opportunity to get some of the younger families in town involved that may step up to volunteer for something like that.
And I think, again,
Great opportunity.
involving the schools in that survey process, I think, gets at some of that larger population.
That's a good
So-
point.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my list. The final thing is unrelated to the list, but Lisa did a terrific job. I stayed for part of it for an Eagle Scout presentation. She, I guess through your son, had a relationship with the family.
Through school,
So,
yep.
And I didn't realize this, but periodically we get invitations for Eagle Scouts or for other presentations. I mean, the one I did last year was for the scholarships, but they come in periodically. And just figuring out, I'm assuming that everybody would be interested in doing them eventually.
Happy to help,
You know? And so the next one happens to come up, I already confirmed to the family that someone from the Board of Selectmen would be there. And it's August 29th. I actually thought that I would be able to do it. I can't. Looks like I'm gonna be out of town that day. We can do it alphabetically, which would mean Malinowski.
I'm not gonna be in town, but I would love to do it.
Okay, for future.
But thank you.
Mr. Shea, you around on the 29th?
What day of the week is it?
I think it's a
29th?
Saturday,
Probably
August 29th.
Saturday, yeah.
Saturday, I should be around.
Yep.
Yep. Another Eagle Scout
Yeah,
It's an Eagle Scout.
presentation?
Yeah.
Yep.
yeah, it's a Saturday, Brian.
Are you around?
I'm around, having been an Eagle Scout, I'm happy to do it.
Oh, well,
Uh-huh.
do you mind?
Not at all.
But go ahead if you want.
No?
Mr. Stivers? Executive decision? Good, and I will forward you the emails that I exchanged
Okay.
with the family, and,
Edward Gostick.
it was, I remember speaking of Roger Challen, I was not a scout. Never mind the Eagle Scout. But I had coached his son, Nick, in basketball, and got invited when he became an Eagle Scout, the first ceremony I went to. And it's cool.
It is
It's cool. So, Sam, I didn't realize, I'm not surprised, but I didn't realize you had been an Eagle Scout.
Hey, I survived the experience even.
And they really are cool things. And it's there's enough pain in the neck stuff that goes with being a selectman and being able to do stuff like this, which are just,
Yeah.
pleasant, enjoyable things are worthwhile. So, Sam, the next one's yours, and then
Okay.
next the next invite I get, either Chelsea or Brian, I'll give you guys the opportunity.
And I'll say that I've often had to learn how to start a fire with 2 sticks and some wood chips in the forest, so it came in very handy.
Well, that was just generally growing up, right? In the 1700s when you were...
That's correct, yes.
So next meeting, maybe we want to shift you to the other side of the table, because you've really alienated the 2 members that you're with tonight, so.
I know. Inadvertently and purposely.
Yeah, yeah.
So somebody will tell me what time and where, you'll send me the
Yeah, I'll
link,
send you
that's okay.
I will send you them, and, I'll copy the woman who I've been communicating with, and she'll be very happy that for sure we've got it covered.
Okay.
I think that's all we have for planning. Mark, or Vanessa, or both. You've been keeping kind of a running tally of the things we've identified, and maybe, it doesn't have to be on the 18th, but maybe by September 1st, have a list of those things. We go over it and maybe even give some timelines. And then I think one of the things we talked about was having, whether it's every couple of months, maybe every month, just a quick, are we moving ahead on enough of these items that it gives us a comfort level? So,
Yep.
Does that make sense by September 1?
Yeah, the personnel board, a number of years ago, had a little chart at the bottom of their agenda. I think someone may have mentioned that, of, sort of, these are our, action items. And I think that's a nice way to sort of keep it fresh in our
Remind yourself.
memory.
Yep.
A lot of times, we get buried in something like a pandemic or whatever, and things kind of fall off our radar right away. But I think that's a nice way to keep all of us on track.
Good idea.
Might be something too we could post on the Selectmen's webpage.
Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely.
Our goal.
Anybody, yes,
Yeah.
anybody from the
Yeah.
public can go at any time.
I mean, it's in the minutes, but it gets buried there. I like having the idea of identifying it on your.
Right, having a
So it stays fresh.
Yeah.
a dedicated link that these are our goals for
Right.
FY '21.
Yeah.
That's a good
Check them
idea.
off as we go.
That's what we did
Yeah.
on the personnel board agenda. Yeah.
The other thing that Vanessa's been asking for is a picture of the board. We need to update the website. We don't have a picture. I don't know if we're just gonna say, send us a headshot,
Yeah,
and we're
It
gonna.
should be
and we'll-
masked.
And we'll do
Yeah.
them at that point, and we'll do something like that, but, I
We could
did,
do like a screenshot at your next
Yeah,
meeting
you know.
without your mask on.
didn't want Chelsea to be offended
I
that,
know.
Mr. Calenda's picture is still was still on the website, so we took, we took
Oh.
it down, and, but again, there is no picture of the board,
Right.
and, there was, also a discussion at some point that we don't have pictures of staff. We don't have pictures, any of that stuff,
I think Sam brought that up.
Sam,
Suggested-
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
good to
Oh,
have
that's-
Yeah.
staff pictures, townhouse staff
Yeah.
at least.
Years ago,
Yeah.
when Janice was still here, we did a staff photo in the town report, because that might have predated our website, actually.
I think that's sort of,
People didn't really know the face
Yeah.
with the name.
it's customer friendly. I mean,
It is,
somebody wants to
yeah,
call
yeah.
in, it's helpful to know what, who you're
Yeah,
talking to.
Is there a reason where if all of us are available, we couldn't, whether it's outside the townhouse, outside this building, get together some Saturday morning or some Tuesday afternoon and stand there,
and hold your breath.
Hold our breath.
stand there with our mask on, and then go, ready, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
take our mask off and take the picture. I
Yeah.
mean, is there,
Fine with that.
is there any reason, I mean, that's just,
Yeah.
As long as you're comfortable,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah,
yeah.
happy to
So
do that.
let's,
Yeah.
why don't we shoot Mark what our availability is, over the next couple of weeks?
Be careful where you put your punctuation there.
What did I say?
Shoot,
You
Mark.
said, well, let's shoot Mark, and then you
Oh,
paused for
oh.
a second, and then you kind of went on, so.
Give him a mask on for that, he couldn't see us smiling.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe we need
So-
a third person.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, this is at least all about process, how are we gonna do it? But we could, maybe it'd be nice to take the picture out back by the new playground at the back of the,
Yeah,
townhouse.
and it's a new playground, it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it's been getting some use, and they put, Arrow came out the other day, put the fence in and everything in that, it looks really nice.
Is everybody around this week?
I am.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
Yeah.
With a little advance notice, I
Yeah,
guess.
so we're leaving Saturday,
Yeah.
away all next week, so anytime before then I'm available.
Okay.
Pick time. I'm flexible.
I'll send some
I'll put my
times.
kids in the
Yeah.
playground.
Yeah, who gets to go on the slide?
Yeah.
And then, again.
Then it's gonna be just like a Zoom.
That would be nice.
I don't think that violates Governor Baker's dictates, mandates.
So we'll
whatever.
email the board tomorrow about trying to find a good time to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's a lot of ground to cover.
So to the extent that we're prepared to start working on our goals, we can go ahead and do that and provide updates
Absolutely.
in September when we kind of have that full list and we can fill in as we go.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I said September 1, I mean, if there's a, you know, a less formal list already, Vanessa, that you just shoot it out and.
Yep, that will come from the minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I said, because I plan to start touching base with the,
Definitely.
with the pilot people again, and, although they still don't know exactly what they're doing from a school perspective, so,
I think it's gonna be tough for
I don't think
everybody.
anybody.
for everybody.
Yeah.
Anything else anybody has tonight?
Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Did you make that motion?
I just
Did
did.
you second it?
I did.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Again, I think that's a lot of ground we covered.
Good progress.
Thank you, Tom.